is to, as we start every year in the committees, is to select the chairperson and a vice chairperson for the committees. So with that, I'll leave it open to the group to entertain your suggestions.
I'd like to, go ahead,
Sorry,
Kathy, sorry.
I was just going to make a motion that we nominate Mr. Janelli for the chairperson.
I will second that.
Any other nominations?
I move nominations be closed.
Yeah. Well, I thank you all for your trust again. That being said, hi, Mrs. Cooper. I'll take a vote. Everybody in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Secondly, I'll ask for a motion to nominate a vice chair to the committee.
I'd like to nominate Al Russo.
I will second that.
I'm flattered.
All in favor?
Get over yourself. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Very good. Thank you. All right, Al, thank you very much. I appreciate your effort in doing this, and I appreciate everybody's faith in both myself and Al. It's good. So that, and I guess a little highlight, the workshop will start at 6. We'll have a presentation by Erica Haynes from the school project. And then that should take about 45 minutes to 1 hour, hopefully, and then we'll just move right into the budget presentation with Courtney. As I said before, I thought it would be sort of exciting and challenging this year. I'd like to also, as a committee, I was thinking after we get through the budget process, is maybe we can get together and work with Courtney to perhaps streamline or to come up with different concepts to present the financials. And to Al's point, the better we present these financials and the simpler we do it, the more people would be interested in this. And we work together to put our thoughts together as laymen, present it to Courtney and see what she thinks. It may make the budget presentation at these board meetings a little bit more interesting, rather than looking at summary or looking at 300 line numbers and losing everybody in the picture there. So
Are you talking about board members only, or are you talking about all the stakeholders?
Such as committee members, if we could come up with ideas for next year as to projects that we can do to enhance the presentation of the financials. Maybe also, find out from Courtney, now that we have a new accounting system, is to what kind of additional reports we can get that perhaps before, we couldn't get because it was labor intense. Things like that. If we can have a conversation with her to better educate ourselves and make a better presentation for these numbers, now that we have a better accounting system, and to try to keep it, more simplified so the numbers are meaningful. Again, it also allows us as a committee to be more functional rather than, to meet once a year for 2-3 weeks around budget season, and then we go to sleep for, 9 months. So, with that in mind, just come up with some ideas as to what you think, how we can improve the financial presentation of the statements, or to request information that we don't have now. I think the new accounting system they have allows us the flexibility to sort a lot better, whereas before it was very archaic and you had to drill down and dig into the numbers in order for her to find something.
Well, I think it's going to be most important going forward when we open up the new academy and have to ask for a lot more money.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And now, as the budget grows, we're going to be more responsible for these numbers, and we'd like to know, where we're spending it. It's easy when you're looking at, $100+ million or 150, let's pick a number, to get lost in the weeds there, and maybe have some spending that's not appropriate, or we can look for some cost savings or cost cuts. So I think it's a big time for us to start to discipline ourselves in going ahead on what these numbers mean and how we can better present them. So it just, just a thought so that we could be more functional, more functionable and play a better part in the presentation of the numbers. All right, with that.
Mr. Janella, before we move forward, if it's okay with everyone, because this is a long night tonight, so about 10 minutes to 7, could we just take a break before we go into the total workshop, if that's okay with everyone? If everyone is good, just move right into the workshop, just let me know, and we won't stop, okay?
Yeah, I think we'll need a bathroom break about 10 to 7 or 5 to 7. I think that's a good idea. So, okay. With that being said, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay. Second.
Second.
Well, thank you. All in favor, we'll say aye.
Aye.
Okay, I thank you for your attendance. I thank you for the chairperson position. And I'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Do we have to?
It's an introduction. I see that Erica is here. I'm going to ask Erica to quickly jump in. You could start a presentation. And before you start, Erica, just would you prefer the questions be held until the end, or would you prefer them as your presentation is going? I'll leave that up to you, the presenter.
Sure. So I will, the presentation tonight is a little different than what we've done in years past. We've changed it. And so I'll share that with you, but I'll stop after the ECS formula and ask if you have any questions for that. And then I want to cover some of these other formula types because there are proposals, whether it's at your local level or at the state legislature, that you may want to understand other school funding types. So I want to just do some of that. And I just want to say how good it is to see everybody's face. I miss you all. So it's very nice to see you. With that, I will start. I'm going to share my screen. And I have sent Kara the slide deck, so she has that for any distribution that you all would like to do. You have my contact information. As always, reach out with questions. You all know who we are, but we started in 2015 and we are a nonpartisan nonprofit that is committed to helping folks navigate and understand education funding and state finance issues. We really strive to help provide policy solutions to transparency issues and to data issues around state and school finance. You can find us doing all of this, and we will not weigh in on any local issues, as you all know, or endorse or oppose local initiatives, candidates, referendums. So we're going to get started just with a refresher here of funding sources for public education in Connecticut. And when you're looking at that dark blue bar, that $6.6 billion, that comes from 169 communities determining what they're going to invest in education from a local level. That top gray bar is less than $0.5 billion from the federal government. And I say that understanding that, as always, $500 million in my checking account would make a huge difference. And yet in the scope of an $11.4 billion annual budget for education in Connecticut, it is a small portion. And tonight we're talking about that orange bar, the $4.3 billion that the state allocates to education in Connecticut. So, you know, the question that brings us here always is, how does the state determine how much money each school district should get? And I want to just remind you that right now we have more than 10 different funding formulas in Connecticut, and they're really parsed out by type of school. So first of all, type matters. Is it a magnet school? Is it a vocational or agri-science school? Where it's located is a secondary concern. And the third piece that will come up in some formulas is who is running the school district. Meaning, is it run by a regional education service center or is it run by a district? So we're going to talk about education cost sharing, and the purpose of the formula is really to determine how much money the state is supposed to give each city and town to fund its schools. It's important to understand how this comes to us, right? So in 1977, in a Supreme Court case, Horton versus Meskel, the state essentially lost, and it was ruled that any type of education funding system that allows property wealthy towns to spend more on education with less effort impedes children's constitutional rights to an equal education. So really, this is the first piece of equity in education funding as we're seeing it, where prior to this ruling, we were very reliant on property taxes. And while it feels like we are reliant on property taxes still, because we are, the state component comes in. And in 1988, they began the education cost sharing grant, which is supposed to make up the difference between what a community can afford to pay and the cost to run the public school system for that community. So it starts with the foundation amount, and this is determined by the legislature. $11,525 is what the legislature has identified as the amount that it costs to educate a student in Connecticut who has no additional learning needs. And yet I'm going to tell you that it also incorporates the state's share of special education funding. So I understand, and I can't help you clarify the difference in that's what it costs to educate. And oh, by the way, the state special ed is in there. We will say, though, that we reverse engineered the formula, and this comes in on the lower part of the second quartile when compared to other states and normalized for that special ed piece, meaning that it's low average. And then what the state did and renewed and added to their commitments in 2017 was looking at the additional needs that students come to school with, which place an additional cost on the district, a cost burden. And they look at 3 categories in the current ECS formula. The first is a low income student weight. This is for students who are living in economic disadvantage as measured by free and reduced price lunch. We could have a whole nother conversation about whether that counts it right or not. But so 30% more above that 11,525 for students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch. We also have a concentrated poverty metric. And what this does, and this is new in 2017 legislation, started in 2018, is essentially if a district has more than 75% of its students who are enrolled in free and reduced price lunch, the number above that gets an additional 5% weight above the foundation amount. And it's not for all of the students in that district, just those above that 75% threshold, the number. And then English learners. The state for the first time said, indeed, it does cost districts more to educate English learning students. And so there's a foundation amount weight of 15%. So let me show you what that looks like, because I think this kind of starts looking at equity amongst our students, right? And in understanding that the general education student there is at 11,525. A student who is economically disadvantaged, the state is calculating the cost at educating them at almost $15,000. An English learner, that increases the foundation amount by $1,729. So this has an impact when we start not thinking that all students come to school from the same place or needing the same supports. It does have an impact. I want to show you just a little bit, and so there are a few things for you to know. One, you will get a copy of this presentation, and I will be happy to walk anyone through it again who might need more or have more questions. Two, yeah, so you'll have this copy, and you will also have the link to all of the tools to look at these calculations on your own and bring them up and even compare them to other communities. So this is the resident student count, and this is what was used for the 2021 education cost sharing model, the year that we're in. And the count for Danbury was 11,729 students. And so what we're looking at over here is also the weighted count. There's no additional weight, so it's just that number. We can look at low income student count, and that's 6,202 students. The weight adds an additional 1,861 students. If you can think of those weights just adding up, right? That additional 15% or in this case, 30%. English learners, you have 3,328. And so at the end of the day, you know that your student count in Danbury is 11,729 students, but the funding that you get is kind of based on all of those weights. And if you were to look at that, it essentially adds up to 14,089 students funded at 11,525. So essentially what they do is just kind of bucket all the weights and then measure that in terms of the foundation amount, 11,525. So basically then the state's calculation, if we accept that the foundation amount is indeed what it costs to educate general education students, what they look at is say, okay, in Danbury, it's going to cost you $162,373,766 to educate the students of Danbury. And now we have to get back to the purpose of the base aid ratio, which is state has to figure out how much can you pay in Danbury and how much does the state need to provide assistance and support. So they do that by looking at the property wealth of the community and the income wealth of the community. And it's a 70-30 split. And essentially what you're looking at is how much money can this community raise in taxes and how much money can this community afford to spend in taxes. And that's at a 70-30 split of property wealth measured by equalized net grand list per capita and income wealth in terms of median household income. So we can look at this slide too. And if we look here, the equalized net grand list per capita in Danbury was $126,677. Connecticut's median is slightly higher than that at $138,000, almost $300. Then they look at the median household income. And in Danbury, that's $68,068. And the median household income across the state is $85,296. So they walk away with that and they look at a couple of other things that go into this. Are you an alliance district? Yes, you are. And we'll talk about the Public Investment Communities Index rank in a minute, the PIC index, but it doesn't have an impact on your ECS, the PIC index doesn't. And so they take that foundation amount, the total need student count, basically how much is it going to cost to educate, and they utilize that ratio of 34.77% to say, well, this is how much the grant from the state to Danbury should be. And I just want to talk a little bit about the PIC index. This is a tool that the Office of Policy and Management at the state uses to calculate the economic health of a community. And it's a scale of 0 to 500. The higher the score, the more economically distressed a community is. So the state said at the time that they created this new formula, which was 2017, there were 19 communities above 300. And so they set that 300 as that threshold of economic distress. And then they tiered the percentage points to add more. You can think of this as the state putting their finger on the scale and the base aid ratio to direct more resources to the neediest communities. So it's a scale of 0 to 500. And this is the test you don't want to do well on. In scope and scale, understand that Hartford hovers close to 500 in the 497 to 500 score. And I'm going to slide back one slide for a minute. Your PIC score is 246. So, and your rank is 58th. So in that scope of things, they're saying we have 57 communities that are seeing more economic distress than Danbury. And so ultimately, the number that we got to, if you recall, when we were looking at that object of like, how do we figure out what the state needs to pay, we get to where they should be, which is they should be supporting you in the amount of $56,458,982. That's what, when we looked at the grant calculation, you should be getting. But we are in year 3 of a 10-year phase-in. So you can see the phase-in grow. And this year, Danbury should be getting $37,698,000. And it grows incrementally year over year. And so next year you'll be getting, this year you're getting $2.5 million more than you got last year. And you can see those incremental increases articulated. I wanted to show you the flow of this, which is the state sends education cost sharing dollars to the town. In Connecticut, we have dependent school districts, fiscally dependent. This is less common, and usually school districts are independent. The ECS grant money then goes to the town because as a Board of Ed, you rely on the town, you're dependent on the town. The town takes the ECS dollars and the local funding allocated and moves it to the school district. And there are just a few notes about that local allocation, right? Dr. Sal and you all are going to come up with the school district budget. And essentially, you know what your federal revenue is going to be. You know what your state revenue is going to be. And that leaves that municipal piece, right? And if from a local contribution perspective, the municipality says, no, Dr. Sal and Board of Ed, we are not giving you that much. Well, you know, you can't go to the federal government and get more. And it has not been working well to go to the state government and get more. And so what happens is you all end up making cuts. Mr. Russo, I'll get to you in one more slide, I think, and then I will get to you. I just wanted to acknowledge you so you know I'm noticing. And essentially the way that this happens is through property taxes. And one of the things, is understanding that property taxes are about real property and personal property, but that towns in Connecticut can't tax. And then again, not all property in town is taxable. So nonprofit organizations, you have a university there. You also have a wonderful hospital, but those are tax exempt organizations and aren't paying property taxes. So let me pop up here and stop the share. And I want to facilitate a discussion about this, and then we can talk about some of the other school types. So Mr. Russo, fire away with your question, please.
Thank you. Hypothetically, if the Prospect Charter School were to open in the city of Danbury this coming year, would the district receive less funding?
If Danbury Prospect started this year in the 2021-22 school year, so opening this September, you would not. But I say that with the caveat that the state is 1 year behind on butts and seats counts, right? So they measure the membership and the enrollment count on October 1st, but it's the year prior. So you would have 100 less students in your district. That count would show up a year after that, and you would not get the state dollars, which are roughly $3,000 per student, would not come to Danbury Public Schools. That said, the municipal contribution cannot be lowered.
Okay. And would the phase-in of the ECS formula change?
From having the charter school?
Yes.
No, it wouldn't.
Okay. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, of course. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Erica. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, good. So with the ECS phase-in, that is based on, does that change with enrollment numbers then? Or is that the phase-in is from old data, correct? Or
So the phase-in, like when we give you the financial information on the phase-in, like, if it were fully funded today, you guys would get 56 million. That will always, that's a moving number every year because of student enrollment. So, when you get 600 students you weren't expecting over the summer, that next year you'll see that count reflected, but it doesn't change the timeline. The dollar amount is always going to be a moving target right up until the year before that final phase in.
but for Danbury, it should always increase, right? Because the state is still catching up.
And your enrollment is still growing. So there's no indication that that number, like your enrollment would have to decrease. And in the scope of, say, to Mr. Russo's point, the charter school, if the charter school starts at 100 kids, and what you're looking at is a student population of well above 11,000, it's that very small amount of literally that 3,000 or so, depending on how that changes, times the number of students.
Thank you.
Mr. Janelli.
Yes. Hi, Erica. How are you?
Good. You look great. It's good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you. Got a question on the timeline of the $56 million. The $56 million, we use the phrase, if it represents a fully funded number based on, is it 2017 information or the prior year enrollment?
The prior year's enrollment. So like, for instance, we can't project that full phase in, we can only use the most recent data to make it.
Going ahead, to get the phase in 2 years from now, if our population increased, let's assume that number went to $60 million. Would we, forget the phase-in, would we be then looking to get $60 million from the state, or we fixed that some historical number of 56 million?
No, you're never locked into that historical number. That is just giving you an update based on always the most recent data.
Okay, so then if we look at a timeline using the phase-in, we are fixed at this $56 million based on some number of students for a period of 10 years, but it doesn't take into account, at the end of 10 years, conceivably, we could be at, let's say, $70 million. Do we automatically get a bump at the end of 10 years from $56 million to 70? And then that's what I'm not understanding, because it seems like every year incrementally, we're not being adjusted for any, assuming we have an increase, we're not being adjusted for any incremental increase in students relative to the dollars.
No, you are. The thing is, everybody's always then showing you the most new, the newest run of 10-year numbers. So like, for instance, this year you're at that phase in, but it's the whole thing is updated with the most current data.
Okay, so it'll be progressively going up for the incremental increase over the period of 10 years.
Correct.
I got you. Okay.
For yesterday's dollars updated with today's kids.
Yeah.
Correct.
Are you allowed to offer any advice as to how we could get this incremental increase for, I see the next year was I think a $5 million bump, if my memory serves me right on your slide. What can we do to request, petition the state to accelerate this for us? It seems like, we're being burdened for them trying to catch up some formula where they never funded before.
So there are a few things. The first thing is that this year, what we are seeing and experiencing with respect to the legislature is that there are two topics of conversation. One is housing and the other is education. And both are being viewed not solely, but strongly through a racial justice lens. What we also know is our organization has published a paper on the racial disparities in education funding in Connecticut. And just to be very clear, there is a $639 million funding gap between white students and students of color in Connecticut. You are seeing legislation this year that is actually targeting all of this, but through the ECS formula. So there currently are two bills that have been proposed, and we'll see where these move. But both look at increasing the weights, particularly for English learners and for concentrated poverty, and lowering the concentrated poverty threshold, and then fully funding the ECS formula beginning next year. So we actually think that's the best path, right? That districts have experienced so many difficulties and inequities in COVID, right? And just dealing with COVID, that at this point, it's important to equip districts with the resources that they need, not in 2028, but now. And so I think that these conversations that articulate the urgency of full funding, in particular, are important. And they're important not just for Danbury, right? They're important statewide, but these proposals that you're seeing get you the dollars, better understand who is in the district, and try to be targeted around that. So I think, you know, if you all still have your lobbyist, they need to be watching those initiatives, because I think those are the ones that are actually moving in the education space.
So it would appear to me that the thinking on the legislative side is getting to a point of being more realistic than something where, you know, one size fits all. I mean, to your point in taking care of the racial equality of districts.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you think about education funding with an equity lens, you have to think about equity as it relates to districts. You all don't have the same student body and deal with the same challenges that, say, even Hartford does. We could compare you and Hartford and say the dynamics are still different, or in my community of Wyndham, and then students are not all the same. So I think, you know, it has come to a point in Connecticut and nationally where some of this discussion is starting to take hold. But I think in Connecticut, and one of the important things is getting the ECS formula phased in quicker. It is, if I could say anything, really important. And it's important in part because we need to be honest with the history of the legislature fully funding ECS. And I don't have a recollection or a date as to when that would have been. Dr. Sal, if you can think of a time, I actually don't know that they've hit full funding. And
No, they've never even achieved the 50%.
yeah.
You know, it's you know, in terms of their contribution,
Yeah.
it's weighing between 40%, 45%. I think for the board's information, which is interesting to me, is that there's only finite money in the whole pot, and it goes to SPED, charters, my magnet, all of us.
No.
This is where I think there's where I think you need to get some clarity. When you put that first chart up there, that's all the money spent on education. Now, is there a separate entity for the other entities that are in there?
So I think it's important, and Amy, I saw that you have a question, or so I will get to you. I think it's important for everybody to understand that that totality of education dollars, that $11.4 billion, that's our tally afterwards. But you know, it's funny, when I was just working on my annual budget for my own household, right? And like, I'm thinking, how much am I spending in medical? How much am I spending for pets? How much am I spending on education, homeschooling my wonderful sixth grader? All of those things. But that graph that we give you is actually backwards, right? It would be like if at the end of 2020, I look back and I tell you how much. So the way Connecticut budgets is not by kind of category, right? So they don't give $11.4 billion to education and say, this is what education is getting, and you can figure out where you want to prioritize the dollars. They are line item funded. So, you know, special ed is line item funded, but will never change. It can't go down. It won't go up. But whether it's construction, whether it is when they had transportation, you know, magnets, charters, those are all line item identified. And so, you know, the best example, as I watch this conversation in your community around the charter school, is, you know, and I just put it in this kind of lens. If charter schools were all shut down in this state tomorrow, right? And there are 10,000 students going to charter schools, and there are about 550,000 students in total in Connecticut. So the 10,000 students, but if charter schools were shut down tomorrow, that charter line item does not revert to education. So what happens is it reverts to the general fund, and then the legislature gets to decide where they want to allocate those dollars to. So for us, logically, we would think allocating from education to education is just what happens. But it doesn't. And that isn't how it happens. So for instance, what happens on a line item in charters in a proposal, whether it's the governors or the appropriations committee or something else, does not create this seesaw effect with other school types. So I think that's important to know. You know, and I respect that dialogue. I think it's an important dialogue that you all are having. And it's not an easy dialogue to talk about the vision of your community, to talk about the vision of youth and education in your community. But I do think it's important to know that, you know, and the governor's budget comes out next week, if he were to add dollars in his line item to charter schools, you can oppose that. And if you oppose that, that's, you know, absolutely oppose it, but oppose it with the understanding that it is not a seesaw effect where if you oppose that school, this other school or school type or education line item will get more. I just think that's an important understanding. Amy?
Hi, Erica. Good to see you. Ask about if we expand the open choice, would that affect our ECS funding?
So open choice is a little funky, and we can talk about that. I have that formula type, so we can look at that a little bit. But open choice is interesting because if they were to expand and include Danbury, because as you know, and for those of you who don't know, what open choice does is create an opportunity for students in a certain community to move out to other communities. It is legislatively only enacted for Norwich, Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven. But the kicker is New London has never used it because open choice goes through the Regional Education Service Center, which for you guys, I think is that Ed Advance?
Right, yeah.
And so in New London, their RESC never got funded for open choice. So they have no open choice students. So even though by statute they're allowed to, the RESC gets the transportation funding to transport students. And that would be something that you would also have to lobby for when you're talking about open choice. So there are a few more complexities with it, Amy, and we can highlight that as we walk through it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So Erica, I'm sorry, I got my hand up, but who's ever next? I want to ask you, here's a clarifying question that I think our board has always supported choice in terms of it's a public choice. The debate has been looking at the financials in terms of what it means. I know we've had this conversation about it not being finite, but that it's a line item, and that line item goes away, could go to the streets and sanitation. Doesn't have to come to education. But where I need some clarity on, no matter what we do, the board, if it's because the effort is within the foundation level with IDEA, then any money that we get is reflected for special ed in that amount. But the real cost comes in for excess cost for us, which has never been reimbursed to a district at 100%. The weighting is very helpful to us regarding ELL because, you know, I always say it costs, you know, maybe almost 1.5 times as much to educate a child with those kinds of needs. When those are within the structure of the public school realm for reimbursement and it moves, then those resources don't come back to the municipality. would have to follow, the money follows the child. And there's where we're trying to get some clarity. And right now, we do provide transportation for all our non-pubs. I think the board's been used to that, although, you know, add some to it. We provide some nursing, but in the choice program, we've been asking clarity on what's a reasonable cost. That's what they use. No one's really been able to talk to us about it. And then how do the other services are supported and at what level? And, you know, obviously if the youngster's not with you, but in another school, you got to provide it. So those are the uncertainties that we're trying to get some clarity on, only from the budgeting standpoint for us, at least for me anyway, when we look at these things. The choice, you know, it is a public school. It is what it is. And it does open up a lot of opportunities. It's sort of those idiosyncrasies that I'm trying to get some clarity on.
You mean the least clear parts of it all, you'd like clarity on?
Well, I mean, that's what people have suspect about, oh, they're not going to get it, they are going to get it. You know, I think shared services, we understand, but when they use the verbiage reasonable cost, you know, as determined by whom, where, you know, all of that stuff, that's what we're, at least I was trying to get some clarity on some of it.
So I'm not going to be able to provide as much clarity as I would wish. And I have to be honest with you in that I wish I could as well. And some of this is just an unknown. So there are some things that, you know, I think we can talk through a little. First, Dr. Sal, I just want to say, you said you believe it costs about 1.5 times to educate a non-English speaking student. And I had a conversation with Dr. Estrella down in Norwalk the other day, and she was saying in New York, they actually wait at 1.5 times.
Oh, really? Yeah. That would be nice to do for us.
Yeah, spot on. So when we're talking about special ed, when we're talking about transportation, first of all, there are some like built in, you know, areas that are opaque, right? What is reasonable services? And right from that foundation there, it begs a lot of questions. I think from our lens, and I think there's a lot of work to be done. Special ed, you have to understand, is much like, and I'm sure most of you do, but is much like the minimum budget requirement that municipalities have in Connecticut, where they cannot spend less this year than they did the year before on education in their community. In Connecticut, Connecticut has that same obligation to the federal government. If you spend more in special ed, you are locked in at that next higher rate. So this explains, just to underpin it all, some of the consternation, right? That excess cost isn't reimbursed until 4.5 times, that it is then reimbursed at something close to 70 cents on the dollar, and is not really supporting districts in a meaningful way. And yet I said with a lot of confidence, it would take a lot to get Connecticut to start adding dollars to that bucket. There are districts and there are communities that do this better than others, and some that just have had a terrible experience, Dr. Sal. So, you know, when I started having conversations, particularly with, to be clear, people who are opposed to charter schools, and for some of those additional cost reasons, you know, there were some communities where, for instance, transportation was really well aligned with the district, right? And, you know, it was done in a really thoughtful way that didn't create a significant cost burden on like, well, now we have to run 12 separate buses. There are also communities in which the charter school works on an entirely separate schedule from the public school system. So, you know, I can tell you that, you know, with confidence, there are districts who do not feel like there is, for transportation specifically, much of a cost burden. It's a negligible cost burden. And there are districts who have had the experience that it's a significant one. The second thing is with special education, because I think the thinking in reasonable, what is reasonable, is that you all are at this PPT. You all, as you know, you are really the ones who are running point on these students so that you can manage what's reasonable. And somebody saying, let's send all of the kids to a high tuition school because it'd just be easier. You're there to stop that from going off the rails. But also I respect and understand that sometimes it doesn't work that way. So I think what I can tell you coming out of this is that the relationship between the district and a charter school can actually create more success, or it can be a frustrating, struggle. And I appreciate both sides of that. And I want to be very transparent. I think back in 2010, I was a charter school applicant. But in my vision, first of all, I was applying for a local rather than a state charter, and there is a difference. But also, I could not have imagined doing a charter school without working with the district, because they're all our kids, right? So I think, take that information for what you will, and hopefully use that to inform you going forward. I think, and this is where we can get into, I think it's always just important to think of the two sides of this. And there are two sides of this, and there is no clarity. I think from, there for charter school in particular, there are different reasons that people support or oppose a charter school. And, from a financial perspective, from a policy space, it all depends, right? It all depends.
Erica, could I ask a question, please?
Sure, Gladys.
Good to see you.
It's good seeing you.
Just have a quick question concerning open choice. What is do you know the financial advantage to a district by moving to open choice? And what would be the financial obligation for the school that's participating in open choice?
So, and I'll get to those slides momentarily, because I think that's where we need to be. I'm not sure. I mean, hopefully the education funding system is designed so that there is never a financial advantage, but there is always a break even. So we can look at what open choice does and doesn't do to create any challenges for a district. But Dr. Sal and I looked at open choice last year, and really the same pieces. The transportation doesn't apply, but special ed is still a piece of open choice. So we can look at that.
Okay.
And hi, Kate Canetta. I want to give you a chance.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Eric. It's nice to see you.
Good seeing you.
It's been a few years. So,
I know.
I had a couple questions, and they're sort of just more general ones that I need to make sure I understand. You mentioned that, obviously for municipal taxes, there are certain properties that are tax exempt. And I'm just wondering, when you talk about the ECS property wealth, the property wealth component of the formula, if those hold true, if it, that they don't factor in properties that can't be taxed.
Yeah, it does not factor in properties that can't be taxed.
Okay, great. And then I just want to also ask you about the state to city pathway for the money. Now, you said something to the effect of, we could not reduce the amount of education funding that we put in each year from the municipality.
Correct.
Okay. Is there any mechanism which ensures that whatever money comes down from the state, which is marked for education, but then when it passes through the city, that it goes to education. And I'm asking this because, you know, I'm just sort of trying to assess, like, obviously we could spend the same thing that we did last year in education here in Danbury, if we're getting a greater amount of ECS funding, you know, because some of the weights change, or if we're, you know, getting, you know, or that it's going up by that increment, or, you know, if other funding is coming through the state, like I know that federal, there's like the second, I can't remember what the name of it is.
ESA
Forgive
2.
me. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Sal. And I know that, so I know that money is also going to be coming down from the state level. And what I'm trying to just figure out if there's any way that we can kind of like track that process as it goes through the city.
You should absolutely be able to track that process, and that in part, and Courtney, certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but an audit should also do that.
The money from the feds comes categorical.
No, but we're
So-
talking the state
About
dollars.
Oh, the state dollars is totally different. Yep,
Yes. Yeah, and
totally
I did,
different.
yes, Erica and Kate, and I wasn't able to answer because I knew Kate had called me earlier about this, and I was like, I was shocked, but I had to think about it for a minute. But it's so clear when you said it, Erica. And there is a chart on the city website that I can share with everybody about what's come to us from the state for what we call that traditional ECS base amount, and then the Alliance catch up from the ECS. That's all involved in this formula that Erica talked about. So it's funding today's children with yesterday's dollars, if you want to take, you know, it that way. So to explain how, just my understanding of what Erica said, you know, there was a point where Connecticut was having a really hard time, and then some districts were growing and some were shrinking. We're growing, obviously, and growing in need in terms of our lower income, and our SPED population. And so as that happened, the state couldn't just take back all the money from those districts that were dropping and give it to the ones that were growing, or they could have, but they chose not to. And so they gave us this money 10 years out. And I think we're into 5 years, is that right?
3.
3, we're only into
3.
3. So every year we get maybe 2.7, and maybe 2.8, and maybe 2.9, because that formula, as Erica said, reassesses where we are relative to what they assumed was the need for ESL and a growing enrollment population. Does that, yeah.
But Kate, to your point, there is always this disparity between what the state is sending and what districts are getting. And depending on the district, like districts will sometimes take out what, you know, if you are paying for services through them, they will take some of that out. So, but you should be able to still follow it all the way through and understand where anything went.
Okay, and is that true also for when you talk about special ed reimbursement, you know, at that 4.5 times, you know, that 70 cents on the dollar past the 4.5 times? Is there a mechanism for that as well? Or does
that comes categorically? I mean, it comes for special ed, and then it is it's supposed to filter through to us, but it really doesn't.
So what happens, I can speak to that. What happens is on all of our high cost special ed kids, 3 times annually, we submit in a report that basically is a line item by child on the cost of tuition, the cost of transportation services, and it basically costs out the amount of dollar value that we spend on that child. So anything related to educating that child, tutor support services, speech and language, special education, so forth. And so we enter that in initially on December 1st. We then get an opportunity to revise it on March 1st. We have to have all students in and accounted for by that March 1st deadline. And then on June 1st is our final spend down. For example, a child that might be out of school for a couple of weeks due to a surgery or something, the transportation costs may adjust down, for instance. So, we project what it should be annually, and then we adjust it. The difference in Danbury is that money, so the 70 cents on a dollar that we get back for that excess cost, and we usually submit in a couple $1 million of cost of those high need students, we get that reimbursement goes directly to the city. And my understanding is that they allocate that in our general allocation.
And you can see that and I can show you where you can see it in the CAFR. You know, it took me a little while to find all the location of where the funds are, but I'm happy to share the city's financial report with you so you can see how, you know, it's given to us and then how it's distributed, because that is in the notes section in the financial report. It's like buried. So
And then
Thanks.
one other comment that I just had, sorry, on special ed funding is you talked about you needing us needing to prove that we spend more money on special education annually. With a growing population, we certainly don't have a hard time showing that. But there are multiple ways. You can do local only, state and local, state funding. So there are 4 different ways, and we do that. You know, Courtney and I work together when we apply for IDEA grant every year, and we have to prove that the previous year we in fact did spend more than we did the fiscal year prior.
That's our effort.
That's called maintenance of effort.
Maintenance of effort. But I will say that to the board, that money gets infused into the general fund, then reallocated, as Kel said. But the last 2 years, with the help of board members and everyone, we've been able to have some set aside, which we could request, which could help us. Because as Kelly knows, she gets all of a sudden July, she's sitting there with 3 unknown transfer ins, which really create a situation for us. So we've had some relief, but categorically, it's quite an effort to get that money into the district, but that's where it goes. So thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Erica?
So here what you're looking at is just a straight up chart explaining the differences in funding. So we can look here. So the open choice state funding per pupil varies, and this is what is going into a community. So say Ridgefield took 10 kids from Danbury. This is what the range is on what they would get. And really it's based on how many kids are they taking. They can't charge tuition, and your ECS is split. 50% goes to that district and 50% goes to you guys. So you would share that.
and that's in the alliance. I apologize. That's in the alliance formula.
That's the open choice.
That's
Yeah.
open choice. Yeah. Again, separate. And you'll see here too, I want to articulate the what's being proposed in Danbury is a state charter school. This is the funding they receive per pupil. They cannot charge tuition, and the city does not, or the community does not get education cost sharing. So let me just show you in a little bit more detail, and you'll get this PowerPoint with all of the details, but local districts are responsible for transportation and special education. Student learning need is not considered in this funding formula, and they cannot charge tuition. So in our legislative proposal, you will also see that the proposal and the 2 bills that are proposed right now propose collapsing all of these formulas so that all students are funded in the same manner with weighted funding, so that we all can have a conversation that doesn't involve 11 funding types. So this is the flow to the charter school. It goes straight from the state to the charter school. Local charter schools, just to be clear, there's only 1 in the state of Connecticut. So don't worry about it, because there isn't one even proposed or pending. You'll have details on agri-science and the complexities of agri-science, but here's open choice so that you can take a look at the complexities of the open choice dollars. So the thing is, you're still responsible, and I'm going to actually stop the share and just kind of finish with Gladys's question. You're all still responsible with open choice. Actually, you know what? I want to check on open choice and special education. Dr. Sal, I'm 99% positive that it falls back on the district, but
I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
Open choice and special ed.
Well, that's that reasonable cost.
Yeah.
And that's what no one's been able to answer that.
So let me do a little bit more digging and at least see what we can find experientially. Kara, you've been taking pictures too.
Well, yeah, I like to have certain things. Can you go back to the slide about what the district is responsible for on the charter school
Yeah.
component? And I just have a question about ESL services, because for special education, the district is responsible to provide the staffing to service students at another location, as well as the busing. But for ESL, there's legal requirements for bilingual services that we have to meet with our non-pubs. And so why would we be required to legally to maintain the compliance service, provide the staffing for bilingual education at this site?
No. And I will double check that in the morning and get that back to you. But I am very confident that you are not responsible for the English learners. Essentially, although it's kind of a weird blend of all of these formulas and all of these responsibilities, in this case, that school is considered a separate school district. And so when we look at multilingual learners and the responsibilities, that actually moves to them. So let me confirm that for you, and I will actually send an email back through.
Is that true for open choice as well?
I don't believe so, but let me double check.
Okay, thank you.
In most of the other districts, right? I mean, English learning is almost twice as prevalent in Danbury and Wyndham as the other districts. So let's just double check on that.
Yeah, that could be a lot of staffing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Erica, I've got a question. The terminology of the ECS money, the $37 million that you've mentioned, does that include the component of what we formerly used to refer to as the alliance money, or is that just by itself, and then on top of that, there's alliance grants included? In other words, just as of a couple of years ago, we used to get, the city got the ECS money and the district got the alliance grant. Then last year, I think they rolled it together. It was called ECS. The $37 million, what does that represent?
So there's a funny thing, essentially, where this is just an interesting, and again, like looking at Connecticut, one of the things that happened was that if you look at alliance districts, technically they don't get an ECS increase. It all comes as an increase, or it had all come through as an increase in alliance dollars. And there were reasons for that are more to protect if there were, say, rescissions in the ECS grant or holdbacks or cuts of any kind. It protected alliance districts in a little bit of a different way where that flow could still continue. So it's kind of a messy yes and answer. It doesn't help you, but essentially it is ECS and alliance.
I got you. Okay, thank you. All right, so right on target. Does anybody have any other questions for Erica?
Eric, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to quickly say that we do have kids going to agri-science. So do we have that? We have that presentation, right, Erica? We can.
Yep. So I already sent that to Kara so she can distribute that. The other thing I just did is put a link to what's called a link tree, which is just really fun. And when you click on that, it has a bunch of links and it looks exactly like a tree. But it gives you access to those tools that I use to show you the data points. So that gives you a little bit more access, and then access to look at other communities as well. I'd be happy to, though, if anybody wants a copy of the presentation, you can reach out to me. I know Kara will get it to you. And certainly if you want to walk through some of this or you want to reach out with more questions, I'm here. Let me know. You know, I miss you all. So
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank
Drive
you.
safely.
Really good, yeah.
it's such a different thing not to have to drive, you know, almost 2 hours home, Dr. Sal. This is great.
Thank you again, Erica.
Bye.
Thank you.
Mrs. Cooper, do you want to take a 3 or 5 minute break or just go right into the budget part?
That was the suggestion. If everybody's comfortable with that, we could be back, start our next meeting at 7:10.
Okay.
Okay, we take a few minutes break.
Okay. Do we leave the meeting or just leave this on?
I would just leave it on, and if you want to turn off your microphone and your video.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll try not to keep us up as late as the union negotiations did. So the first slide, this is just a quick intro. Dr. Saw just asked me to talk to you briefly about this, what we're calling CARES 2 funding. We've had coronavirus relief funding, we've had CARES 1 funding, and now we're CARES 2. We were really pleased to get in. There's a lot of restraints, like Dr. Sal mentioned. It's not to be used to supplant operations, and we'll kind of reiterate that as we talk through, and I'm open to questions on that. I'm going to talk about the current year. So Rich kind of wanted me to put in context because it was so unique that we braided that funding. So I want to talk about the current year very briefly, and then the upcoming year maintenance budget. Rich and I kind of put it side by side so you could see what happens when the money that we had this year kind of, it goes away. And so just the takeaways I was hoping we would all walk away with are, what's our base budget and maintenance needs? What are Dr. Sal and Cabinet's district priorities? And then what are our next steps for us to get your feedback as a cabinet, respond to any of your questions in this week so that we can set up a nice presentation that looks similar to what we did, you know, last year, which would be similar to this that we did last year, but with our updated priorities and our updated information given what we know. So with all that said, just very quickly, Sal asked me to just walk you through this new coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriation. You know, CSSRE, the 2 funding was $492 million for the whole country, which brought it up to 603. So before it increased what had formerly been about 100 million up to 600. And so the CSDE is holding back 10% of the funds, just like they did originally. So we expect to see a little bit potentially more funding. And then the 90%, that's the 10.1 that we're getting, is that LEA-based funding. They released it on January 29th, and the grant application is open on February 22nd. It'll be open for a good month. They're going to work with us, but Sal's got us already, you know, starting to talk to you about it today so that we can get our plans in place. It is not at all intended to supplant. It's intended to support the activities that I'll describe in just a moment. And Kara, Kevin, Kim, and Kelly, as well as Dr. Sal, will work with you and our administrative community to understand how we're going to use the funds. But essentially, as we knew, the first CARES money, which is called ESSER 1, is ending December 30th, 2022. So we have our plan in place for spending that down. And then this ESSER 2 extends one whole other year beyond that. And it's retroactive. So things that were eligible that we already started to do, we could utilize the funding to offset those activities, and it goes into the future. So it's pretty flexible. And then very briefly, the priorities are academic supports, learning loss, learning acceleration, and recovery. I describe it as being like very broad and also a little bit specific. So it gives us a lot of leeway in terms of the things that we might identify as being needed. Family and community connections, school safety, social, emotional well-being, the whole student and staff. So a lot of the things that we were doing in CARES 1, but they've learned some lessons. So based on those best practices, they're identifying a little bit more broad use of the funding. And then remote learning, staff development, bridging the digital divide for our students.
Courtney,
And-
I think your slides if may not be advancing. I don't know if you were presenting from a slide just now.
Oh, I was, okay.
Okay, I just wasn't sure.
Okay, thank you. I was, Kara. Thank you for telling me that. That's, can you see the what's next slide or no, not? Well, you know what? I'll email you all the slideshow. I'm not sure why it wasn't showing. Um, I can email it all to you, but essentially it lets us do all the things that we did with the CARES Act 1. But in addition, now we can do some also facility repairs and safety improvements if we saw fit to do that.
Okay.
Yes.
You want to share it now, Courtney, and I can post it up if you can't.
You know what I'll do?
There you go.
I'll
There
go
you go.
right into the budget presentation since we're a little bit limited on time, and just know that if you have questions about the CARES funding, there's some documentation about it. I can answer questions, and Cabinet just got it this past Friday, so it's about 10.1 million for Danbury. And can you see this slide? What I'm showing now? It's a bunch of numbers. Can you see the number slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, so I'll try not to be boring. It's a revenue and expense slide. So this is looking at our current year, and you'll probably remember from this summary way back when we asked for this much money and we only got this much. We asked for 146, and so we did this braided thing that got us to 145,504. So I'm just reminding you, here we are with this current year, 145,504,000. And that's made up with that additional alliance increment, which is something that Erica just spoke to us about. That's the funding that we get, additional funding each year. The CARE plan's out for that has to meet certain requirements of closing the achievement gap and other details. We did use that to fund new things that we were going to do that also happen to be alliance eligible or meet those criteria. And then we had CARES money. Grant carryover funds. These are all one-time funding. The CARES is going to expire in September, and the carryover was because we underspent a few of our grants last year because of the nature of the pandemic. And at the time, we had what we thought a city fund balance of 2 million. And then this is the city allocation, the matrix development funds, and that got us to the 145 million. And this year, all things being equal, something that Rich kind of asked me to do is say, okay, we're going to get another alliance increment. We don't yet know what that'll be. I just held it flat, but it'll be a little bit more. The CARES is not going to be available for the upcoming fiscal year, with the exception of the 10.1 that we mentioned. But I'm not accounting for that here because that's brand new, and we'll talk about that outside of this process. It'll be part of probably our braided conversation, like Dr. Sal said, after the February 14th deadline. And the grant carryover money, we don't have that this year. That ends. So our available resources, if the city were to just hold our budget flat, would be 141 million when you're comparing apples to apples. Now, does that make sense to everybody? I know that's a little bit odd way to think about it. The city fund balance went up because at the end of the day, when it's unaudited, but this is basically around where we landed with what we had left over, and the city put that in reserves for us, that $2.6 million. Does that make sense so far? There's some confusion. I need to pause.
Well, Courtney, just,
Yeah.
if there's hands up, if not, we can always come back to it.
We can come back to it. So,
Yeah.
and then it's a little bit of detail, but then there's a projected expense or a budget. And this is like our budget.
Can you make that a little larger?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, it might be helpful.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then this is basically looking at like last year versus this year, how there's a lot that's behind this, but this is just rolling it up for our salaries, what we're projecting, our retirement savings that you're used to seeing, our part-time salaries, our benefits, service and fees, repairs, all the general categories. The cost of doing business goes up. We have contracts in place. Even when during the pandemic, when we called all of our partners and said, okay, give us a break next year, there's still an increased cost of doing business, just like everywhere else. And the way that I'm showing you this is last year, if you remember, these were all the new items that we funded like of the things that we asked for, we were still able to do some amount of the school climate, social emotional, special ed, curriculum program needs, you know, the student support specialists and NEASC requirements, ESL, all of this stuff we did with that braided funding. And you'll just kind of recognize it if I go back here and show you, you know, the school climate, social emotional, that's 485,000, and here's how we afforded it. Special ed, that was 732,000. Here's what it's for, and here's how we afforded it. And this shows you what we originally requested, and then what our proposal was for that year, and how we ended up funding it. And we're going to do the same thing this year. So you'll recognize these numbers. Now, when I get down to the bottom, there's some items that we spoke about before that carry forward from the grants that if we want to keep funding them, we're going to have to account for them in our budget. So the one-time things, the funding that we used for example, student support specialists, for two of our counselors, as well as, I'm just going to scroll over because it's actually stored on the side of this document, social workers, and some of our teachers and substitute teachers. We have to put that back in the budget because that funding goes away. So I'm accounting for that. So in the bottom line, and then this is just showing how we propose to the city to spend the reserves. So the city allowed us to get up to our insurance corridor, just max it out, because, you know, the unpredictability of where we are with coronavirus, we want to be really careful about funding the insurance because, you know, and because we're self-insured, and we just want to make sure that if there's any one-time fluctuations, we're accounting for them in holding aside a reserve. Technology, it's a new reserve that the city council voted on letting us put forward. So if there's any one-time technology projects that we're doing that Gina needs to do, or software, you know, when you're doing the training or the development, that's set aside. A special education reserve that Kelly's been needing for fluctuations that happen with the population in spite of, you know, just because of the nature of special ed. She could talk more about that. And then just a general emergency contingency. So that's that 2650 that you see up here. This is just showing you on the budget and expense side how we're planning on spending that. So what does that mean? That means that once again, we're at this magical kind of 10% number that we're asking for. And that's made up of a carry forward budget of 7.5, which I'll explain why it's a high carry forward budget. And then new asks of 6.484. So that totals 13.9, or about 10% over the base of these different funding sources. The carry forward maintenance, you would normally think, well, it's probably about 3%, right? Normally things increase every year by about 2.5 or 3%. But what's happening is because last year the city only funded us with, if you'll remember, the 1,275 million, it left us short of being able to fund our, you know, base kind of like collective bargaining and bus increase and all the things that happen to increase the budget. So each year they rely on us to go to Alliance or the other funding streams to kind of take care of business. It puts us further in the hole for the operations budget. So we want to be really careful when we go to the city for the ask that not only do we need this, and we'll get to you and explain why, but we also need this, because if this doesn't get funded, we're going to be another 3% in the hole next year. And it's just going to be that much harder for the city and for us to climb back from that. And so that's 10%. And I'm going to go through the new asks, but I'm just going to pause there and just ask if there's any questions on this first page of a lot of numbers.
Courtney, I have a question. Can you go back to the revenue side?
Sure.
Geez, let me look.
Yeah, the matrix thing is always, it's becoming confusing. To me, I thought the matrix was a 10-year deal that the city had worked out with the corporation, and that the 550,000 was to be given to the city for the impact that the matrix would have on education. Did we ever get that money for the 550 for the 2021 year, and what's happening for the year 21-22?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question, Rich. So Mayor Bowden did commit to it, and we do have great partners at the Matrix. We did not get it in 1920. I believe it had to do with the delay in the development that wasn't anticipated. We do anticipate that we'll get it in 2021, and we do anticipate that it should be available to us for at least those years of the deal of the agreement. The reason I didn't put it in here as available funding is because in an accounting sense, in a normal sense, if I had the revenue receivable, I would have kind of a document stating what it was that I was getting and in an agreement in writing. The city is the receivable on their books. So I'm not comfortable putting up the appropriation like we did in the past and leaving a hole in our budget, until we receive the cash. So it was just a decision there to leave that. You all can give me the feedback if you think we should put it back in, but I don't have a document that supports the agreement. So I just don't want to leave us at risk.
Sure, I can understand, you're not willing to put it in, but conceivably, if they didn't pay for 2021, would we be expecting $1.1 million in 2022 and 21-22?
They said that that's not the way it was structured, and again, not having a paper document to support it. I don't know, Sal, do you know that they said they weren't going to do that for the 1920 year? So we're just going to continue.
I think we better get clarity on it. Because
Yeah.
that has been, first they were unsure about the occupancy and the pandemic. I think we better get clarity.
Yeah.
And we'll ask Mr. Cavo regarding that, and Dave.
That's a lot of money, and theoretically, I think of it as just a pass-through. It's coming from one source directly, to the city, for earmark for something. So
yeah, and they didn't get it in the first year, but in your typical world, if they gave us an appropriation for it and we don't have the receivable, we should still be able to spend the funding. But I think we just need to put together a memorandum of understanding so that we can be clear in the budget.
Yeah, in addition to the accounting, I think Dr. Sal, is something you should square away with, Mayor Cabo, is to, what they look to do with that money and how much they look to give it to us. I mean, $500,000 here and here, and you double it, has a nice impact on us, particularly when the city gave us 1.2 last year.
Yeah.
It certainly helps.
Yeah.
Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you, Rich. Okay.
Courtney, didn't we have a discussion last year about that $550,000? So what is the discussion there? Did we get a part of that last year or now? Because that number is still hanging around about that $550,000.
It's still hanging around. So we have it in our current budget appropriation. In FY19, which is the year, not our current year, but last year, we didn't receive it. We put it up as an appropriation. So in other words, we said instead of 130 million, our budget's 130,550,000. But they never gave us that money. So even though we had the appropriation, we didn't have the cash, and it left us short. Now, luckily, we had a surplus last year. But this year I'm a little more concerned. So we're pushing. Sal and I should just have a conversation with Joe and Dave and get it in writing, and then I'll be able to put it in and feel comfortable with sharing with you that we have that as a resource. But it's contingent on the city receiving payment, which they haven't yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And you'll just see also, just to note that Sal was able to negotiate a good deal with STA when we were in our closure to carry forward a credit for this year, which was nice for us this year, but we don't have it next year because, unless we do another negotiation with them. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure, Rachel.
And just to add to that, I'm sorry to harp on the matrix funds, but I remember asking Mayor Mark about it this time last year, and the project hadn't been approved by zoning yet. So I think it's just the delay now with the pandemic, but don't quote me on that. Don't, hold me to it. But I know for last year it was, just waiting for the project approval. So I have a quick question about under new items.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by maintenance budget with the carrot?
Oh, sure. So basically, there's some backup detail in here. And again, I'll shoot you out this whole spreadsheet, but I wanted to be able to talk through it first. But essentially for a maintenance budget, we're saying when you have your salaries, there's bargaining agreements that you assume are going to happen. So every year, depending on, how Kim and Sal and myself negotiate, it could be 2%, it could be 2.5%, it could be 3%, depending on how those bargaining agreements come out for the new ones. And then we're committed to previous year ones, because they're multi-year agreements for future growth in their contracts. In addition, there's steps that they move up. So on the salary side, it's just the cost of, bargaining and step increases. And similarly, like I'll give you an example in the transportation budget, contract. When we negotiate that contract, they negotiate into their contract like a increase every year. It's kind of standard with the transportation contracts in Connecticut. Maybe we can revisit that in this new world with an RFP. But so, for example, they get 3% increase on their costs every year. The same thing with a lot of our, service agreements and things like that. Some things are held flat, and some people have agreed, as we've negotiated during the pandemic, and said, "Listen, can you do us a favor? We're continuing to do business with you. Can you keep flat?" And they have. So this just reflects that.
Yeah, Rachel, we define the maintenance as just as we were, the cost of just opening the doors without any, wish list for us to move ahead. So it's the same, basically the same staff. It doesn't include any increase in staff relative to growth or anything like that. It's just the staff and the incremental increases. So as if we did nothing and had no additional money, it would be that just that to open the doors on the existing components and the existing staff we have now.
Yeah. It's exactly.
Okay.
And why is it such a high percent? It's because you really have to kind of go back 2 years, because the city really didn't fund us last year, and we did all the shifting to the one-time funding sources. So really, we're kind of catching up for that.
Okay. And can you tell us how much is in the reserve for all of those accounts currently?
Sure. Currently, there's no reserve right now for technology. The special ed is also new, and the emergency contingency is new. I can get back to you with the insurance reserve. I might even have it in the backup here. There's so many documents here. No, it's not in this particular. So I will get back to you. This gets us up to, we have a partner that works with us to do an assessment on our insurance costs, that we work with. And they recommend a percentage, it's called a corridor that you fund, which is a percent of your overall, previous year's expense with a growth factor to set aside for risk. And you have to meet a certain minimum. You don't have to meet that maximum. This is just getting us up to the maximum because, it's prudent to do that, and it helps us to budget for our health insurance more appropriately.
Thank you.
Yeah. Especially in a self-insured world, you want to kind of take care of that. But yeah, I think we're probably up to about 4 million in reserves. But don't quote me. I'll get you.
At one time, they were saying you have to have about 4 months, right? So.
Oh, so that'd be a lot more than 4 million.
Yeah.
Right. So but there is a standard they've asked us to maintain.
Yeah.
So we've been able to put so much in there each year.
Yeah.
I kind of remember 5 million, but that was probably a few years ago.
Oh, so it's got to be a lot higher than that. So again, don't quote me. I'll get you the number. I just know we got up to the max with this amount of what we could do.
Yeah, it might have been 7 million, but I think we could check that.
Yeah. It's like broken into two. It's like IBNR, which is the incurred but not reimbursed cost. So it just means you're setting up for future risk. And then in addition, this, what they call the corridor that gets you, it's like 25% of your total, yeah, it's 4 months. It's probably like 25% of your total bill. So we're probably up to 10 million now, I would say. Maybe. I don't know.
So these reserves are funds that are really expenditures on the Board of Ed's part that are then given to the city.
Correct.
They hold them aside.
Correct. Yeah. We transferred over to the city, and they have an account that they identify for us that holds these funds, and we can request them if we were to need them.
Is the emergency contingency, is that broad-based to be used for whatever we want, or is there limits? I mean, are there restrictions as to what you can do?
No, there's no restrictions on that except for that it be one time. And initially we were going to use that for PPE and desk shields and all of those things, but then that CRF and what's called the coronavirus relief funds became available from the state. So the city allowed us to just keep that as a category. So it could be a building emergency, it could be, you know, anything that's one time in nature that we would need to take care of, we can ask them for that funds.
So Courtney, I'm just trying to remember this. I think even whatever it is that we want to do, he still has to get approval by the council, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. But I watched that council meeting and they were pretty amenable
Yeah,
to it.
but I just, so the board knows that it's, somebody could say, okay, but it does go, it does have the light of day, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. 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 It's not just anything. We're not buying, I don't know, bubble gum with it. We're, yeah. Okay. So would you like me to move on to the details of the new funding?
Yeah, I think that's important. The other stuff, as I said, would be
Yeah,
trimming the lights
it's
off.
kind of old hat. Yeah, and the new, it's this 6.484 here. And it's not really new in that you've seen a lot of these things before, as Sal said. So I'm going to make this bigger. And we're breaking it out in those kind of categories. And I'm going to ask my colleagues to help me talk through because they know what these are much better than I do. But the first category is increased K through 12 enrollment. And it totals about 912,000. And I'm just going to clarify that this is special ed. And so for elementary, it's for 6 teachers. And I'm going to have Kevin talk to this rationale why we thought that we'd put aside 6 teachers, Kevin, if you don't mind.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So for elementary and high school, I'll speak to those two.
Yeah.
For one, and Sal spoke to some of these concerns earlier. One, we were down about 130, 140 kindergarten students this year. And we're certainly expecting our typical enrollment numbers, if not more, for kindergarten for the 21-22 school year. And, you know, we're still waiting, and we did open up kindergarten registration, but we're certainly waiting to see what the impact is going to be for the 21-22 school year. We did not lose kindergarten teachers last year. So, you know, to be transparent about that, we did not reduce sections necessarily. And so, you know, hopefully we will come even from this, but we're quite frankly, we're really concerned about a significant bump at the kindergarten level. And you know, with 140 students across the system being moved up, it's not necessarily concentrated in 2 or 3 schools. It's kind of spread across the district, which means we can't necessarily reduce staffing at the first grade level. So that is to be determined. We will have some kindergarten numbers, hopefully in the next couple of months, that will give us a better sense of what that growth is going to look like. But we're certainly anticipating it, as other schools, as we understand, are across the state. And just to clarify, a lot of families, one of the reasons why the kindergarten numbers were down, a lot of families chose to keep their students home this year, you know, for remote learning. You know, part of the unknown is, will they reappear as kindergarten students or elect to come back as first grade students? So those are some things that we will learn over the next few months. Again, as part of our continuing high school growth and also increase in graduation requirements, you may recall you saw some of these requests last year, and that is an additional business teacher for the business finance graduation requirement, in addition to health. These were both additions to the graduation requirements, and a social studies teacher was also requested from the school. And so that's where you see those 9 additional FTEs for high school and elementary. And I believe Kelly is going to speak to the special ed piece.
Sure. So the special education teacher request is for 4 FTEs, and that is very similar in pattern to what Kevin just explained for general education. The first is, as you guys know, we've had a large preschool incoming cohort, and that means they are matriculating to kindergarten. So we are anticipating the need for additional staffing there. And then at the secondary level, with the increase in graduation requirements, the expansion potentially of servicing students until age 22, we will also need additional support at the high school level as well. So it'll kind of support at the two bookends, the incoming kindergarteners, kindergarten first grade, depending on which grade they matriculate into, and then at the high school level as well.
And the next so that's 910K. And then the next category is school climate. And some of these are familiar to you from the past. We're requesting 940,000. And Kevin, do you mind talking through the school climate piece, or Dr. Sal, if you'd like to? Yeah.
Sure. I can, Dr. Sal, you want me to take these two?
Yeah, go.
Okay. So we have in the request this year, we are requesting an assistant principal for Shelter Rock in Stadley Elementary School, as well as Ellsworth. You might recall seeing these requests for the 2021 school year. I recall, I believe it was my first or second year in district. Dr. Sal talked about kind of a standard for when it's time to consider an assistant principal in the building at the elementary level, and that number is typically 500 for school districts. We have Shelter Rock and Stadley both at over 500 students in each building. In Ellsworth right now around 470, and given that they are growing at a rate higher than any other elementary school in the district, and quite frankly, we're anticipating a bump, as per the demographic study that we had done. We are requesting 3 assistant principals for those 3 elementary schools. In addition, and to support the social emotional across all of our schools, we are looking at creating a school climate specialist at the elementary schools, which will kind of serve as a restorative position to help to address the varying concerns that might come to the principal's office. This person would be skilled enough to, restoratively get this child back in class, reach out to the families, refer them to a social worker if appropriate. This would not require a disciplinary response. If so, the principal certainly would have to be involved. But that's what this climate specialist, essentially their role would be. And so we are looking at this type of position throughout all of our elementary schools to support the principal and to address those varied needs and the social emotional concerns that we've continued to talk about. And so similarly for the middle school, a climate specialist to support the middle school principals at the 3 buildings. In addition, we currently have a principal lead at our elementary school, and we feel like it would be appropriate to have a principal lead at the middle school to also help with I'm sorry, Courtney. No, it's okay. I made the mistake of trying to follow while you were moving around, which is not really necessary.
I just picked up. I apologize.
Okay, but it's really in an attempt to try to restore, as you can see the language here, restore previous funding for middle school coordination. But it's really about having an opportunity to have coordination amongst the middle school principals and allow for them to have the ongoing dialogue that they need. And try to make sure someone's compensated for leading those discussions. And then last but not least, with the high school, you have seen this before, and so we feel like it's really important to have a school dean, climate dean at the high school to help with academic and the social emotional concerns that might take place at the building. This will also lighten the load a little bit on the assistant principals as well. And oftentimes in schools, and we haven't decided specifically where they would land, but oftentimes these positions, the 9th grade is oftentimes the grade level that experiences the most need. And so that's probably where our dean will spend the majority of their time. For the rest of the school, we can have our climate specialists similar to the ones that we have talked about for the elementary school. Again, this would be a group of people who would have the skills to address, restoratively get kids back in classroom and address those social emotional needs that we've been talking about over the last couple of years. And then last but not least, we have parent liaisons, amazing ones at Morris Elementary School, and we want to duplicate that model at our high school. And frankly, we've been talking about what this could look like district-wide. But the high school, with over 3,000 students, really should have these type of resources in their building to reach out to families and students when they're not coming to school, when we have concerns about engagement. Right now we don't have these positions in place, and it's unreasonable, quite frankly, to have social workers knocking on all the doors, giving the numbers, over 3,000 students in the building. I think that's it for me, Courtney.
Kevin, I got a question. The climate
Sure.
specialists, but are the special, or do they have to have any specific training or academic credentials to fit that role?
Mhm. So I believe, and Kim, I don't want to infringe upon, any negotiation, or I don't know if this is a position that's already existing in the contract, but I believe this group, similar to our para line, paraprofessionals, it's on par with paraprofessionals in terms of academic college credits. So I believe it's a 2-year degree or at least 60 credits to be eligible for this type of position.
Thank you.
I mean, just so the board knows what we came through 2 years ago. One of the things that the findings that we had definitely was that getting to youngsters in a timely fashion. And we really think that putting this team together, we'd have the ability. Now, you remember you have your assistant principals dealing with all the other kinds of things and difficult disciplinary kinds of situation. But some of that other stuff that just allows to permeate creates conflict and issues. And we really think by putting the dean in, putting the support specialists in, and also getting the outreach workers, that we could create a synergism that's going to get out and hopefully get ahead of a lot of these things. I was very concerned with the high school and the number. It's only growing, as you all know, right? Going back there. So I really think this is something it's really needed, particularly at that high school. And the outreach workers, has been very successful in moving out and getting to parents, putting parents in line with support in the community. So it's a 360 kind of support for a family, not only dealing with the youngsters' behavior, but supporting the family. And that would be the model that I would like to endorse and see us move towards, because it has helped us at the elementary. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question as well, please?
Go, Kate.
Kevin, I just wanted to ask you real quick, from your perspective, when you're looking at this, these additional supports we're trying to put in. I mean, I think part of my concern is that we've known that we're kind of behind as far as the socio-emotional supports we need, to help our students. And I recognize that we're trying to play this game of catch up. From your perspective, do you think that this is going to be enough support, for our students, or would you anticipate continuing to grow this over the next few years? Or, I'm just trying to, get a sense of if that's something that you would want to be expanding, or if this is sort of like where you think things are just going to land if we are able to do it.
So, yeah, Kate, thanks for that question. So one, I think you're going to find as we go through the next few categories, that this is kind of coupled with, an effort to increase school counselors at our secondary level, continue to increase and include more social workers or psychologists in our schools across the levels. I am a big proponent of climate specialists in that type of position. I think we will find, I think our principals will find, I think our teachers will find, and to Sal's point, Dr. Sal's point, it creates an opportunity for us to respond to behaviors in real time. And so, if you speak to our middle schools or secondary principals, or even elementary for that matter, when we have a case, one of our children who are in crisis, it takes up, it can take up half the day for our kid, for our family, and the staff member. And so when we have these climate specialists and we have someone who, has the skill set to address those behaviors, They would be trained, and going back to Mr. Janelli's questions about training, certainly we would want this group trained in the same training that our support folks went through with the restorative practice training. Certainly I believe Kelly does, kind of where I don't know if I think it's Kelly's group that does training with our support staff to talk about de-escalating skills. So like all of those things would certainly be part of it. To answer, this is my long way of saying, I feel like this would be just kind of opening the door for addressing the social emotional concerns we've talked about. Ideally, I think we would, have more guidance counselors in our buildings, and we would have more social workers in our buildings. And frankly, this is our way of a less expensive way to try to find more skilled people to address behaviors in our schools. And again, I think as a cabinet and as administrators in the district, as we're making these recommendations, and after so many years seeing that we can't get the assistant principals, as an example, in the elementary schools, well, the climate specialist could help. And so if I'm a principal at one of the elementary schools and I have a kid in crisis, one of my kids are in crisis, I'm alone, right? And so this means I can't be available for teachers. I can't be available for other parents. It's just me and that child potentially. And I think this would be a great resource for our buildings, Kate. But this is coupled with other things. This is not a standalone, social emotional support.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that, especially because, I'm looking at this, and what I hear from you as you're talking about this is that you're doing you guys are doing your absolute best in terms of the planning to use our money wisely, which I know has been a complaint I've heard from folks before, but it seems to me like we all recognize that there are things that are happening in our district, and based on the response to previous requests, you're sort of going back and you're finding a more efficient way for the district to really address these underlying issues. So I just want to say I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate.
I got a question. And to your point, Kevin, I think you've explained just incredibly great I'm going to use the word, the impact of what the funding for at least this category is. Courtney and I have talked about maybe a subsequent a meeting to address the impact of what we're looking at on these new issues, because I think the verbiage and the understanding as you've explained here is very, very important, so that people understand what it is that we're looking to try to do, as opposed to just slough it off as preventive maintenance, which is a very rough way of saying if you just wanted to slash money, it's preventive maintenance. However, the way you phrased it, it's totally different. So I think in another presentation, the significance and the meaning of what we're looking to do and the impact it has on our students and our education is something that we've got to put across and make people understand why we need these funds.
And to Rich, to your
Thanks,
point,
Mr. J. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and that as part of what we're going to take away from here, and Rich and also Kate has asked as part of the finance committee reps to us to do is, once we get this into this nice PowerPoint presentation that we're going to present to the board and also take out to the community, say, well, what would happen if we don't get these funds? So they've asked us to also look at, so what does it mean if we don't have these for our school community? So we can do that as well.
Exactly, and it's equally as important that the public understand it. And in our presentation to the city government, they have to be aware, as as Kate put it, the catch up that we're trying to do and the increased importance as to what the effect of these particular elements are on education. And if we don't get it, conceivably what impact it has.
And so embedded in the climate is social emotional, and Kelly does have a multi-year approach that I would just ask if you could talk about this piece, Kelly.
Sure.
Just got one quick question for Kevin.
Okay. Yeah.
Sure.
Kevin, climate specialist. It sounds like guidance counselor. Are you saying that our guidance counselors are overburdened and we need to increase them also?
Well, I'll say yes, and this way the guidance counselors, maybe I can run for mayor and all of them would definitely vote for me. But Mr. Russo, the truth is they are overworked. We had NEAS come in and do a study with the district a couple of years ago. We learned, from the NEAS visit, that we were undermanned in our counseling ranks, which is why in the next section you're going to hear, Kelly continue to recommend that we continue to add school counselors, to the high school. So I believe their ratios are well over 300. Years ago, as an assistant principal, I worked in Norwalk High School, and they were, comfortably at, I should say comfortably, but they were 225, 250 per. There's a reason why, districts like Norwalk are outperforming us. We need to make sure the counselors have a reasonable caseload so they can meet with students and families and talk about planning and continue to work with students to make sure their grades are where they should be. And I think this is also the reason why, it's like, we continue to have leaks and we try to patch from left to right. And so, because Dan can't get his guidance counselors, he continues to ask for a dean every year. And I think it's important for us as a district to make sure that we can address these social emotional concerns. And Mr. Roos, I don't know if this is what you're asking also, but the school climate specialists will help, some of those challenges that our schools are having. They may help, some of these issues not go to an overburdened social worker office, because in real time, the climate specialist could be available for students and families. Overburdened assistant principals, because the climate specialist, obviously under the direction of the administration in the building, can help support, and restoratively get kids back in class. And that's another thing. Our kids perform well. I think we've demonstrated over the years that when kids are in school, that we do well. But we need our high school kids, our middle school kids in classrooms in order to benefit from the instruction. And the climate specialists will be positioned well to make sure we keep kids in school and in class.
Very well stated, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I will kind of piggyback on what Kevin had just added. I'll start with the school counselors. Mr. Russo, as you brought up, our school counselors certainly need more support. The recommended national guidelines from ASCA are 250 students per school counselor, and we are well over 300 at our middle and high school levels. And so in order to further support our students and their families, we need to add additional school counselors. And that was also highlighted in our NEASC accreditation as an area of significant need. And so we are proposing over multiple years to add to the secondary level. So for next year, to start by adding 2 school counselors to Danbury High School and 1 to the middle school. And then a similar recommendation would come in years to come to add additional school counseling support to both the high school as well as the middle school level. The board was very supportive last year in adding 2 additional positions, which started this process to start to reduce some counselor caseloads in certain areas. One of them in the general ed population, the other one to provide additional support to special education. So this would be 3 additional school counselors at the 6 through 12 level. In addition, another area of social emotional support that we need is in relationship to Pembroke, which most of you are aware. Pembroke houses one of our special education programs for students primarily on the autism spectrum, although there are a variety of different children with needs there. And their number of students has grown substantially over the last handful of years. We have the largest number of special education students at the elementary level at Pembroke Elementary School. It's currently over 120 students, which is a significant portion of the population. And for that reason, we do need additional support services there for the special education students, as well as to support with the general ed students and supporting their social emotional needs. So we are proposing an additional either school counselor or social worker to be added to that school building to support in those areas.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm just going to glance down at the bottom line and go back up to the details. So as we're talking through, just to be mindful, this is the 6.84 and it's about 80 head count. You know, so I just want to be mindful of the overall need that we're expressing here. And so I'm going to move into the area of curricular programming and support, which is Dr. Casimiro's expertise. But first, I'm just going to ask if Kim, because Kim worked through this with Kara and Gina. And although it's a curricular support, it's because of our new world, it's reporting into our new director of information technology, Gina Jasmine, and it's a way to use existing resources. She really did a good look at her organizational chart and reprioritized a lot of the positions there to support our new world. Kim, do you mind just talking briefly about what's going on there and how that's going to help enhance the curricular programming, and then Kara can go into the detail?
Sure. So some of what we're talking about reorganizing technology comes at the point in time in the calendar now, where we're turning to negotiate the contract with the Secretaries Union, who embodies the technology people. So part of Gina's planning with me over time has been in anticipation of those negotiations that are going to start in the next 6 weeks or so. So some of this is kind of forward planning, but what's been great about Gina's vision from her seat is that we have taken a tremendous amount of new assets. So all of those new laptops that we've deployed, all of the things like the hotspots and the wiring in the buildings to make sure that everybody could log on at the same time, all of the troubleshooting and all of the problems that would come along with that include maintaining a help desk that's going to actually help our staff to be able to use all of this equipment. Some teachers are going to have multiple screens so that they can toggle back and forth with kids who are remote and kids who are in person. All of that is a combination of both hard assets, infrastructure, and soft assets or people. So this first line that you see here is part of this is sort of shorthand for a much larger plan that Gina's got that will start to grow over time, the technology asset kind of maintenance and supervision piece. You might remember that we have sort of a student data wing and a hardware wing of our technology asset. And Gina sits on top of both of those. The other thing she's trying to do is over time build in sufficient kind of liaison. So someone who can bridge the gap between the technology and the educational software that we're buying. So that's another piece of that. So what you see here is kind of the beginning of the rollout of that plan that will continue hopefully over 2, 3, and even a 5-year plan of growth.
Thank you. And then just briefly, Kevin, this is the K-12 Applied Arts Health and Special Area Lead. Is that you talking about that? And then Kara gets to this big piece here? Or how are we dividing up that part? I apologize, I don't recall.
No, Kara.
That's okay. Yeah.
Kara, I apologize. You're all of
That's
this.
okay.
Yeah, this whole
No
thing
problem.
here.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to move through all of these. So
I put your language out. There's under humanities and supports is some components that we'll also get to for you, because that's where I've got your literacy coach. If you want to talk about it now or there, I just wanted to show you that's where it's part.
Okay. So we'll just go in a linear fashion and we'll get there when we get there. So the K, so as you know, we have curriculum administrators for our areas like STEM and humanities, and then ESL and world language. We have at one point had a K-12 fine and applied arts curriculum administrator, but we did lose that during one of our budget cycles. And that was several years ago. And we've been limping along ever since. We've had some great people who have all been working hard, but that broader centralized visionary planning and coordination really needs to be had. And when we got our NEASC report, we had some concerns about the curriculum development in the fine and applied arts needing to be updated and refreshed and coordinated. And so we definitely, it's time to bring back this position. So that would be a fine and applied arts curriculum administrator and for special areas. So that's a pretty broad bucket. There's a lot of different courses that fall into that. This will be particularly helpful as well as we move forward with vision planning for academies and all of the different themes that will fall into there, and the careers and the integrated curricular work that's going to need to happen. So this is going to be a key position as we roll forward. Last year, we did include some student support specialists. If you remember in the budget last year, they have been phenomenal. The timing of hiring them has been crucial given what's going on, and they have been actively running all of those intervention groups across the K-5 spectrum. We'd like to continue to grow that out and to add 13 interventionists to work with them to coordinate intervention in the SRBI process happening in the K-5 buildings. They come at they're around 10,000 a piece. Actually, this should be about, I think, 130, Courtney. I think we pegged them around 10,000. Yep, I'm just noticed that now.
I think I only had 12 because one moved over, but that's not true. So, okay.
That's okay. Yeah, I just noticed it. And they work for about 10 months and they are 100-day non-union employees. So they are very valuable in our intervention planning and programming. And so we hope to add that, particularly as we know that we're going to need a little bit more support in that area going into next year. There's about 70,000 in there for some additional supervision over the summer. We are in the process of planning out summer school and the scope of what that could look like, given a couple different scenarios. And so that is for some anticipated supervisory additions that we'll need. As far as the curriculum goes, about 31,000. We have several areas that just need refreshing, but also in those fine and applied art areas that we spoke of. So we definitely need to get moving in there. We've also have some revisions in our ESL programming. As you know, we've implemented the EL Achieve program, K-5, that is going really well. So we'll be adding some additional rolling that up, and we're going to be starting to revise our middle school programming as well. So there's some curriculum development money in there. It's professional resources. Those are things like training related to some of the programming that we have as we bring on things like kits for interventionists and programming that we need to shore up some of our learning loss. There'll be specific training and programming and kits that we'll need to support that learning. Curricular resources are sort of your hard goods, your consumables, your supplies. Last year, we were really hoping to make a huge dent in our library, if you remember, in our initial ask last year. And with sort of everything that was going on, that fell to the wayside a bit, and we were only able to order very small amounts. So we're really hoping to replace our libraries. I apologize for my dogs making an entrance. And our phonics program, which we have rolled out this year in the pandemic virtually, has been going really well. And we would like to purchase decodable readers to continue to support that. So those are kind of two big hard replacements that are needed. We also gave away quite a bit of materials in this environment, in the sense that we sent home individual books to students, math manipulatives and things like that, so that students had materials at home. And so as much as our students, I'm sure, will be trying to bring those back into our schools, we know that many of those will not return. So some of those are to replace some of the resources that were distributed. Hardware and software, those are things like dot cameras, different types of technology that's needed to replace. STEM Discovery Tech Book is a large component of this this line item as well, and that's to continue to roll forward our science curriculum that we're implementing in the K-5. And there's also some software music curriculum there as well, and that is mostly as a result of our partnership with Save the Music, which has been wonderful, but we are keeping up with all that needs to happen there to continue to grow that program out. Let's see.
And Kara had her staff identify, this is like 1.2 as I'm highlighting just these categories, what was new versus ongoing, which meaning, you know, when you look at the curricular budget compared to other districts, and just like even in general, like what we had in our identified as for curriculum in our budget, she really advocated to set it aside, because typically we would kind of like find the money at the end of the year, which is not a way that we want to operate.
Yeah, and I appreciate the way that we've been able to do this particular planning, because it gets down to the details. There's things that we need on a regular basis, and then, you know, as we try to bring new programs on, and as we just try to refresh things and bring in new resources, it may be the same program but better resources to support it. You know, we were able to break it out into these categories here. So happy to answer any questions if you have those. Otherwise, I can move down the list.
Any questions on the curriculum piece? And seeing them, we're really happy to have Augusto here to talk about the SLL request, which you know, Augusta, we've summarized it a little bit, but this is your ask for 915K. If you could go through overall the need and talk through the vision here.
Sure. Well, the first line item, it's the easiest one because it's not a new item. It's just restoring what we used to have. If you remember, we had 3 PSYOP coaches at the middle school. We are down to 1. 2 positions were eliminated during difficult times. So now we are asking for restoring the 3 full-time positions. I would like to highlight the fact that it's pretty much known throughout the district that our PSYOP coaches, instructional coaches, have been playing a crucial role, especially during distance learning environment. They are our worker bees. They do everything. Every teacher, everybody wants a little bit of each one of them, and we unfortunately cannot clone them. So last year we expanded a little bit at the elementary level. I think now is time to restore those worker bees at the middle school. So this is not new. It's restoring what we used to have. Everything else, well, the second one, the certified special student assessor, comes strictly from a compliance requirement from the home language survey guidelines, clearly indicate the need for an L specialist. Our reception center, as you know, has been commended, and now the central registration is a safe haven, a one-stop shop for all the new families coming to Danbury with their children to register for school. So the ESL component is definitely the core, the majority of the work performed on a daily basis at the center. So this is basically a compliance issue. We need to comply with the guidelines that clearly indicate the need for an ESL specialist. If you remember the last time, a few years ago, I shared with you the Title III compliance review. Our ESL reception center was one of their commendations. So we are really proud of having become a model for the entire state. And then everything else works from compliance, legal compliance, and also we are way beyond the compliance status in terms of needs. We are now looking at student to teacher ratio. You know, Kevin mentioned the fact that Norwalk is outperforming us. I'm not sure if that's the case in ESL, but I wouldn't be surprised because they're looking at a student to teacher ratio way down, way below what we have in mind. So again, these new positions are required by law, by Connecticut bilingual law. Every school, any school identifying 20 or more English learners who speak the same language is required to offer a bilingual education program in that language. So our schools are all required to implement bilingual programs across the board, K-12. This is just trying to bring some common sense to what we have determined as the achievable and realistic student to teacher ratio that's possible. Again, compared to other school districts, we are still way above everybody else as usual, but we are moving in the right direction. We are way down from, in some cases, 1 to over 100 students in some schools to something close to 1 to 65. That's the goal. The third item, the parity between ESL programs at Rogers Park and Broadview. This is something we contemplated last year, but for obvious reasons, we stopped short from doing it. We didn't think it was appropriate. We're moving ahead. Again, it's a compliance issue. Both middle schools are required to offer bilingual programs. We have been housing bilingual programs at Rogers Park. Now I think we need definitely to implement them at the Broadview because we have so many students. It's not manageable. It's not appropriate, not pedagogically right. So in addition to the compliance issue, there's the pedagogic argument. to be made. Dr. Casimir alluded to the L-Achieve, that's the bottom line item, professional resources, and then the curriculum development. We are expanding next year the L-Achieve, which is a new English language development program that we started for in grades K through 2 this year. It's giving us tremendous results, again, especially during a distance learning environment where we are definitely seeing kids using language much more at the higher level than they used to before. So that's a natural expansion of the program, moving up to grades 3 and 4 and 5, and then exploring the possibility of starting looking ahead to the expansion in terms of moving to the middle school as well. So again, in a nutshell, I would say that as usual, from my perspective, we're looking at compliance, legal compliance review, and we are looking now at also a decent, acceptable student to teacher ratio to see if we can address their needs in an adequate and fair way.
Augusto, Mr. Ginelli had commented on impact. Just give us, I know you can go on for 9 hours on this, but just give the board the flavor of this systemically, how this is going to impact teaching and learning and academic success for kids.
Yeah, well, you all know that our ELLs have had some challenges throughout the years, and we are now in what I believe is the optimum track. We are providing explicit direct instruction to these youngsters, and they are taking advantage. We are seeing improvement. For many years, we have seen what we call long-term Ls, students who have been considered and labeled as English learners for many, many years. And the reason was, in all honesty, because we were short in terms of staffing, we were not able to provide what we consider adequate language support services. So we are now moving in the right direction. We are also looking at something that is good for all students. Whatever we do from an ESL perspective is good for all students. It's good teaching plus, as I usually characterize these approaches. And that plus is the language component, the focus on language, explicit direct instruction that is provided to these youngsters so that we can accelerate. We cannot perform miracles, but at least we can, based on research, we can accelerate their English language acquisition so that they can become successful within the regular classroom environment. And we are providing a dual approach implementation, let's say, direct explicit instruction, and then the PSYOP coaching component. And this is paying off across the board. And again, this is good teaching for all students, and it's essential for ELLs, but it's also very useful for all students. That's why we are seeing the need for these PSYOP instructional coaches, because everybody's benefiting from their know-how and from their ongoing job embedded support.
Thank you.
Courtney, can I just ask a question for clarification? On the EL Achieve, under the curricular because it's a curricular resource, that the rollout of those materials is a bit more than that. I know that we talked about, I know it's somewhere. I'm just on this sheet, where do we have that captured? Is that in the curricular resources?
So the way that we've done it, and we can change this when we talk about the braided funding or however we like to do it. Right now, this is just the incremental additional cost. So because we have the EL Achieve funded in Alliance in what I call like last year's carry forward Alliance budget, I'm not showing it here, but it does exist. It exists on Augusto's very detailed document of all his needs, but it exists under the Alliance funding. Okay. So the next category is humanities, arts, and literacy.
Courtney, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
I'm sorry. Yeah, sure, of course.
I was just wondering if I could ask Augusto a couple questions about the EL funding. Augusto, thank you so much for the update on where things are at.
You're welcome.
And I certainly especially appreciate your emphasis on the SIOP positions. And I know, so it looks like, we're trying to put 2 additional SIOP coaches in, which is going to bring us up to where we were.
That's right.
But obviously, we've seen a huge increase in the number of EL students coming into our districts. So where we were is probably not going to be adequate for where we need to be. If we're talking about, trying to come to a more, and I recognize we're just, we're looking at this from a cost saving standpoint to some degree, but I want to kind of get a sense from you as to how many SIOP coaches you think really we need district wide if we're going to move the needle on, the goals that we have for our EL students.
You're putting me on the spot. I mean,
I'm sorry.
Well, I would tell you that we have made significant progress at the elementary level right now because of the implementation of the Achieve with the board support and central office support. We have hired a couple of additional SIOP coaches at the elementary level. We now have 4 coaches, which is a little more manageable than before. We had nothing. So each SIOP coach is assigned to 3 schools, 4 schools. So obviously, would I like to have 1 SIOP per school? Of course, but
okay,
that's the long-term goal, right?
Right.
The same thing for the middle schools, and I appreciate your highlighting the fact that this is not new; it's just restoring. So again, if we get this approved, we will go back to having 1 coach per school, per middle school, which is, again, much better. Then at the high school, we haven't mentioned that, but a few years ago, a couple of years, 3 years ago, we had 2 coaches and we are down to 1. So hopefully next year, we will ask for another one at the high school. So little steps,
Okay.
But
And
I think we're moving to a point where we are starting to feel more comfortable.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get a sense from, because you were very good at sort of pinpointing the student teacher ratio, looking for like a 1 to 6, a 65 to 1 ratio for the teachers themselves. And so I just was sort of trying to get a sense from you as to, are we talking 1 per building that would be best, or are we talking about like maybe multiple SIOP coaches per building? In an ideal world, I recognize we're not there, but I just want to kind of get a sense of, what level of support they have to provide, because like when we talk about counselors, for example, when we talk about what is an acceptable workload for them, it's certainly less than the total student population of a school. So
again, we, contrary to other school districts across Connecticut, we have been increasing our student population and particularly our ELL student population, right?
Yeah.
So again, coming down from 1 to over 100 teacher to student ratio down to 1 to 65, it's already a significant progress. When I mentioned before, using Kevin's comparison with Norwalk, for example, is looking at a 1 to 50. We are looking at 1 to 65. So right there, you see that there's need for improvement. Again, if we keep moving at the same rate we are going, especially during the last 2-3 years, we'll get there. But we definitely need to hire additional teachers, ESL bilingual teachers, and definitely additional SIOP coaches. It's a process. It's a process, and I'm sure that with your support, we'll get there. Every year, if we can hire a few additional FTEs every year, we're getting better. We're getting better, and
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Augusto.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That was really great. Okay, and then humanities, art, and literacy, we've got $315,000 of an ask. This includes some specials teachers, so about 3.5 at the middle school and high school combined. And so I'll just have Kevin briefly talk about that, and then the humanities literacy coach. I apologize that wasn't up with the curriculum, Kara, and then we'll get to that.
Thank you, Courtney. So the three specials, one music, one art, and one PE teacher that you see here, are aligned with the potential growth at the elementary schools. So we are projecting that we would need at least one additional specialist teacher. And so if we get to the point where we have more students in our elementary grades, particularly the K1 grade levels, which could mean additional sections, we are anticipating that we would need at least one additional specialist teacher in these areas. I believe it's yes, it's the music and art. This year, we needed to, in both areas, we hired a 0.4 position. And so part of that request is to make them full-time, not only to address any potential growth, but it's just actually the growth that we have now. So we really need the 1.0 just to, in each area, to hold firm. And then if we don't have any significant bumps, we will be okay. If we have any significant bumps in enrollment, we may need to revisit the specials areas. And then the specials teach.
The specials are used for our prep periods for our teachers, which permits them to meet and do that things that they have to in terms of teaching and learning and instruction for meeting purposes. And as Kevin says, we've been able to spread them out among the elementaries. But I think the point he just made, if we do receive more students, we're going to have to figure out how to increase it, because not only we have to service the youngsters, but they do provide the backup service for planning periods for our teachers at the elementary. So that's why they've been bumped up. We'll have to watch that closely, as Kevin just mentioned.
And currently, our specialist teachers are shared in some of our schools. We have a music teacher at Danbury High School. I believe there's 2 of them. We need to upgrade the position at the high school, so it would be a 0.5, and so that this way they would no longer be shared between the high school and the middle school. They will remain at the high school, give us an opportunity to continue to grow that program at the high school. And that's why that 1.0 music is there, because that's compensating for the 0.5 that they're going to be losing at the middle school. So just a quick sum, a 0.5 increase for Danbury High School that'll give us an opportunity to continue to grow offerings at the high school. And then that is reflected in a 1.0 for K8 because they're going to be losing a 0.5 person to the high school full-time in this recommendation. So 1.0 music, 1.0 art, 1.0 PE, and then a 0.5 actually music for the high school.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, and then Kara, the nice rounding out for the curricular part for the humanities literacy coach.
Sure. So this is a literacy coach to service the 3 middle schools. And we have had this in the budget in the past. It never seems to quite make it very far, but it's certainly is needed. This is 1 literacy coach to service the 3 schools. And again, more so than ever, small group instruction and intervention is going to be key to helping to shore up some of the learning loss and to accelerate students as they move through the middle school. So we are hoping to, this position is key because it helps to teach teachers how to do that work best. And so we're hoping that we can get that back into the budget for next year. And then just to kind of continue on so that we I'll just pop down to summer school. It's gonna pop around a little bit and then wrap up that piece that's all tied together. And that's just 250,000 is the ask above our typical summer school expenditures. And we are again working on for what that plan looks like, but that's sort of a ballpark TBD on our expected expenditures in that area, considering that we will likely to spend more and expand on our former offerings.
Yeah, and that includes the special ed component, and it's also, Kelly mentioned, we're going to probably need to, who knows what this new variant's going to look like, and so, we're just holding aside a placeholder that will likely need to continue to distance the children in the schools, so there'll be additional, operational costs and busing costs as well as the academic costs for expanding to the students.
Last year, we were able to invite many more students because it was virtual and it worked out well. So, but the community conditions will dictate what our plan is as we get closer to the summer.
Yeah, and so it's a good segue into the pupil services and support, Kelly, for these additional items, about 424,000. And if you could just talk about these needs.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about the speech and language pathologist many times before. So very similar to the conversation related to our school counselors, the need to reduce their case sizes and their caseloads so that we can provide adequate services to our students still exists. We have added approximately 2 SLPs or speech and language pathologists over the last 3 school years, which has very much helped with us providing the appropriate services to kids that is needed. And so while we're still seeing some increased enrollment at the pre-K level in particular, we do need an additional SLP to shore up be able to make sure that we maintain the appropriate caseloads that we've been able to create over the last few years. So that is the reason for the request for 1 additional speech and language pathologist. The other area, and again, relates primarily to preschool, is that we are seeing increased enrollment pre-K and the early elementary levels. And earlier on, many of our students require support in the area of occupational therapy or physical therapy. Those are services that are provided to help students to access their academics. And again, the caseloads have slowly been creeping up in those areas, hence the request for an additional support person. These are 2 different certifications and positions, so it'll look more like a 0.5, 0.5, or 0.6, 0.4, but overall will be 1 additional full-time equivalent to support in that area. Next is the Assistant Director for Special Ed and Pupil Services. This was a request that was made last year, and due to the need to reduce the budget, there is a need to more adequately support the 1,700 or nearly 1,700 special education students and numerous support staff that work in the department to be able to monitor, provide appropriate supervision of staff, professional development, liaison with families, create the strong programming that we've been able to maintain students in district, and an additional support personnel in that area would surely help to be able to ensure that we're able to provide services that our students require and provide that appropriate level of monitoring and professional development for our staff. Then you have the school nurses. I think this line probably speaks for itself, particularly this year. I cannot say enough things about our nurses. They have been absolutely phenomenal this year. Kathy O'Dowd, in addition, you've heard her at all of our board meetings and other community forums, and they need additional support. They needed support before COVID, and certainly in these times, they need support. So this would provide, one additional nurse to be utilized district-wide, particularly when we have an absence or an outage, or we need more support at the parochial schools. We are obligated to provide support in those environments, as well as to support our ever-growing high school population where the nursing support services have not been adequate. And so that this was something also highlighted in addition to our actual facility at the high school as a need at that level in the NEASC report. So that would be 2 nurses district-wide. And then lastly, as all of you are aware, we have opened a new preschool site. So we are now currently operating at 2 different locations, and we need a school secretary for the building that we just opened. Right now it is operating without, which means that the administrator for special education, as well as some of the support personnel, are kind of fulfilling that secretarial role and duty. And so we are requesting an additional school secretary for the preschool in particular. So I think that speaks to those areas, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
You explained. Okay, yeah.
Sorry, I just have a quick question. This actually goes back to the summer school piece. When we're talking about the additional funding coming down, we're not factoring that in here. When and if we make the application for these funds from the state, because we do have to apply to receive those funds, if I understand correctly,
Yeah.
that will cover special ed students as well as standard standard students? Is that, okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's really nice, and we actually it's allocated to us on the Title rules, distribution rules. So we do actually have the funds. I mean, we have to make the application, but the funds are available to us. They're not going to be
They're
redistributed.
earmarked for us.
They're
Okay.
earmarked for us. Yeah.
And so does that play into the attempted the line item for the nurses as well, because that's an expansion that may be related to our increasing needs because of COVID, or like sort of standards changing as we go forward because of COVID?
Kate, one of the things we need to be careful, I need help, is this month, what we're seeing in front of you here is what we're going to need to sustain and go over no matter what happens with the grant. And I was going to speak at the end of this, but I'll do it now. I think the ESM 2 money, as long as it's related explicitly to, I'm going to call it mitigation of academic loss, and also of dealing with the coronavirus, of which, and social emotional support, we will be able to braid funds to run programs. But my worry and continued worry is that with the city looks at this as a way of getting into the budget. When these get into the budget and they're one-time infusions, it causes us, as you know, it will double and triple the amount of money that we're going to need down the road. So I'm asking for this up front. Now, down the road, can we use that money for that? Yes, but it needs not to be supplanting what we're doing. And that's my worry. So yes, summer loss, part of it. Nurses, part of it. Even technology, part of it. Facilities, improved ventilation, part of it. But again, some of these are a one-time cost, and that one-time cost will come back to hurt us if we don't embed it into the operational. So that's the challenge with the money. I think I mentioned that the other night to the board, and but all of this can potentially be used. And I will say right now, I prefer not waiting. I think our kids need help, and if we can implement some things sooner rather than later, we will attempt to do that. But if you would take the CARES money away, I'd say to you, between the PSYOP folks, the nurses, these are all things that ought to be operational.
Yeah.
I hope
Thanks.
that.
Yeah, that really clarifies. Thanks, Dr. Sal. And that's sort of why I asked the question, was to just sort of assess that a little bit, because part of my concern is that, and Courtney mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, because of the way that the municipal funding was managed last budget cycle, we're further in a hole than we normally would be. And to count on this one-time funding again, that is one-time funding. It's not there for positions. It's there for, maybe building repairs is a one-time event, that it could cover and not make a huge impact for us. But my concern is that, folks are going to see that money that's been earmarked, for us as, okay, this is fixing your problem. And if we don't work on that municipal funding stream, then the positions that have to be paid for every year are just not going to be, we're not going to be able to maintain them.
Yeah, and that's the last thing that we want, is to be able to build that good synergy and not have it available.
And not be able to extend it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And so an easy part for me to talk about is just a few little operations items. So bus, with the enrollment growth, I mean, we're already behind with the buses that we need. We're already overcrowded. So, Sal asked me to put in one bus, a temporary rental line for the facility, for the reservation staff. They're going to be housed over at right up from BBAC on Beaverbrook. So this is until, I called it Osborne. I shouldn't have called it Osborne. I think it's the Ellsworth construction. And we'll talk about that tomorrow night at the facility meeting. I will change that. And then furniture and supplies. So we're always behind in furniture supplies. I put that in the budget, given that we're looking at a potential, uptick in the little kids, and we kind of want to reassess what's safe for furniture. So small amount in there for furniture supplies. And network maintenance, this is a big ask. This is because our network is, defunct. The contract runs out. We need to upgrade and move the servers from the high school to Beaverbrook. and come into the 21st century with that. And so this is the ask for us to be able to do that. And so that total there for operations is about 695K. And that brings us to a total ask of new items or items that are restored typically through Sal. That's a couple buses, yeah. It's actually not just one bus, it's a couple buses. Sal's asking me in my text. He's correct. And so that's about 80 head count and 6.5 million for our, I'd call it new, but not new. It's restoring some old things that we had that worked well that we want to do and just continue like Augusto mentioned, you know, the good work that we had in the past. Sustain what we need to do curricularly and all the good explanations in the climate that Kevin gave you as well that we should be doing for the district. So I'll be really brief. I just wanted to go over 2 more tabs. I know there's 100 tabs on here, but very briefly, this is what you're used to seeing. This all ties out to the other numbers, but it's just showing it to you in a slightly different way. I'm going to send this along to you. This is the base budget for personnel with the increase, and then showing you all the new items. You'll recognize this 6.5 number. And folks were asking, well, how did you get to that growth budget? Well, this will show you how if you're interested. So for example, if you look at the employee benefits, this is our current budget. It's saying if we grow Social Security by 3%, which is just the historical trend, if we grow our health and dental insurance by 4.8%, which is the historical trend, and the workers' comp by 3%. So for example, that's what this is showing you. And then that gets out to that 9.9% increase. And then I'm not going to go through this because I know this makes people cross-eyed, but this was last year, how we talked to you about that complicated braided funding. I'm just going to send it back to you again. And if you're interested in looking it over and asking questions about it, please feel free to do. So this just shows you how we did it. And then I'm suggesting that we build it again like this. So as we work through, we'll build out a PowerPoint presentation that will be presented to the board next week. Rich Janelli has suggested if we need another finance committee between now and then, we're happy to set that up. And or if you have questions for me or any cabinet members on anything we talked about, we'll be open at the end here today to do so, but also throughout this week as we build out a nice PowerPoint presentation. And this is what we'll visit when we get what we get from the city. How are we going to braid together the funding to do what we need to do? I'd prefer not to talk about it as braided funding this year because really, as Dr. Sal said, we got to pull this out and it's a total separate planning document. And Kara and Kevin and Sal and our team are meeting on that starting on Friday to start to talk with administrators. Oh, even tomorrow, I think. Tomorrow and then again on Friday about planning out for the CARES money. And so I welcome you to look at it. I can send along the documents for the categories that the federal government and the state of Connecticut outlined for the CARES money. And so with that, I'll pause. I see Kate has a question.
Courtney, I've got a question or a suggestion.
Sure.
I thank everybody. I thank you for the presentation and everybody for their contribution. Seeing that this is so voluminous, I think to the board members, my suggestion would be is to digest and look at these spreadsheets that's Courtney sending. Any questions you have relevant to the presentation, email Courtney, Dr. Sal, and Gladys your questions on it, and they'll get back to you. I'm also going to, as Courtney mentioned, ask if it's okay with Gladys and Dr. Sal that temporarily, as a date, we meet again on Tuesday of next week before the board meeting to go through this presentation so it's refined a little bit more. Again, some of my concerns are dwelling down on the impact. There's information that came up relative to restorative type of costs and other costs that are mandatory, such as the NEAS and as Augusta was saying. So I think if this information is brought out, we could identify those items and those costs as to what's absolutely necessary and what's restorative, and then basically, you know, we could get down to that $6 million or $7 million new ask. Maybe if you drill down, there might be a lesser number. So that would be my proposal. Whether Gladys and Dr. Sal agree on next Tuesday is leave it up to them. And whether it be a finance meeting or a workshop, I'll leave it up to them as well to decide. But we're trying to, as I said, put this together as we did last year, so you could see the flow, keep the same continuity and the rhythm in there. And then hopefully by next year, we could have more information on that $10.1 million. So that, again, I think that is a very important subject, so that somebody doesn't look at this and say, okay, they're asking for $14 million. They got $10 million from the state. You know, all you had to do was fund them for $4 million. And as Sal mentioned, that being the case, that means next year, we're $10 million in the hole. So it's a lot of explaining, a lot of education for a lot of technical stuff, which I think is important. And I think the time is necessary so that we're all comfortable with what's being prevented. So that, again, we could advocate for this as well, and to the general public and to the parents, and as well as to the city government. So we'll get back to you on another another presentation on Tuesday for that.
Sounds great. Kate, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have one more question. And Rich, I certainly don't want to take up too much more time, because I know we're getting close on 9 o'clock here and everybody's been very patient. The other area I just wanted to bring up and ask about, and I'm not sure if I missed something anywhere in here, please correct me. One of the issues we've been talking about is minority teacher recruitment, bilingual teacher recruitment. I know that there are a number of different ways that we're working on that issue. My sense is that it would be helpful if we had funds specifically set aside for that initiative. And I don't see them outlined here, so I just want to ask, if that's something that we are working on. I've certainly heard from a lot of people about it, so.
Yeah.
I can speak to that. Kate, every year we do have a budget. We have a marketing budget that we use to do things like expand the places where we go to do recruiting, that kind of thing. But where we're seeing the most bang for our buck has been with these homegrown programs that we've been using. So you've heard us come and talk to you a lot about using the kids that go through kind of the teacher prep and into WestCon, and then filter back in through our hiring, and also this new alignment with NYU. So all of that is already built into the current budget. The other thing that's kind of come out in the last couple of days is there's some grant money out there. So we're looking at doing some funding that way also to kind of shore up the teacher recruitment piece. But I'll tell you, one of the things when we were looking at the numbers just this week is that what I would call our new class. So we bring in, if you call it about 115 teachers, which is where we were as of November, we were running at just under 14% of Latina, Latinx staffing in that pool, and another 4 to 5% of other teachers of color. So our numbers they're about where they've been, but they're running ahead of the state numbers. So we're kind of happy with what we're seeing. Obviously, we can do more, and that's what we'll look at this grant money and our harnessing kind of our existing marketing money. But it's less a matter of having the money built into the budget than it is finding the places where we're able to kind of recruit and do that.
Sure.
So
can you talk about the grants a little bit, Kim, and just give me a sense of how they make a decision about who they're going to award that to?
Right. It literally just came across my desk, and Kara Casimiro, I know you forwarded it to me as well. And I know Kevin popped it out as well. So we actually have just started looking at it.
Okay.
We have in the last couple of years, though, I want to say it was maybe 2 years ago that we also were able to get some State Department of Ed money filtered our way for the minority recruitment project as well. So I guess I proffer it by way of saying that I don't think it takes a lot of money for us to really put a good expansion into the efforts that we've already put in. And we're also working a lot with our existing staff, like, for example, our paras and tutors, to see if we can't urge them into the teaching ranks by getting some additional schooling. So there's those kinds of pieces in the work. So I think that, there's certainly a lot of priorities in this budget, but I'm pretty comfortable with the money we've got, that we can continue to kind of do our 3 to 4 to 5 year plan on how we're going to continue to bolster those numbers.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like the numbers are increasing, which is great to
Yeah.
hear.
Yep.
You know, and
Yep.
that's really the goal. So I just want to make sure we continue to, you know, do that
Yeah.
the best way, because those teachers are in demand everywhere. I mean, that's the
That's
reality.
exactly right.
And there are a
That's
lot fewer
exactly
people going into teaching. So I think that, you know, it's, you're trying to play this game of like, how do we make our space more attractive for others? And that's
Exactly.
something that, you know, I've done a little bit of looking around online, and, you know, some of the things that we could be doing, you know, offering certain incentives for teachers that move to our district.
Mhm.
You know, those, I'm not sure how those can show up in a budget, whether it's here or whether it's at the city level. So,
And don't forget, a lot of those things have to be bargained.
yeah.
Right. So any
Yeah.
kind of disparate pay or incentives are going to have to be bargained as well.
Yep.
So there's definitely lots of layers to that. But great comments.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Kate, the grant is called Minority Teacher Recruitment Grant.
Thank you,
Oh,
Kevin. I
that's-
did catch that in the chat there. Appreciate it.
Okay.
That's a very, it's exactly your question, the name of the grant.
And just so everyone knows, we had actually applied for the grant last year, actually 2 years ago and last year. 2 years ago, I'm sorry, just before the pandemic, that we had an opportunity to join a job fair. And that job fair actually ended up not happening because of the pandemic. And then last year we had applied also, and I'm sorry, 2 years ago, we a recipient of the grant. It's $5,000 grant. It's certainly not a lot of money, but you know, it certainly was some monies that were afforded. And then we had I think we had received maybe $2,500 or $3,000. And then year 2, we applied again. And then we were told that they were looking to grant those monies to districts that were not a recipient years prior. But they did make us aware that they were looking to hold this is Ed Advance. Ed Advance was looking, I believe it was Ed Advance was the RESC, and Ed Advance was looking to host a minority teacher fair, which certainly we would have been a participant in, but it ended up not happening. And so I'm hoping, you know, that is something that will happen this year, and certainly we will have a table, and you know, be one of the districts that will be looking to recruit.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, future. And Rich has just reminded me that we do have a placeholder here for a multi-year budget. We did not get to it today, which includes the growth that Kelly talked about in her special ed teachers and in the counselors and in the climate specialists that Kevin spoke about, as well as enrollment projected needs. Sal has me also working with Rebecca. And if you'll recall, she was a partner with Glenn Yackel to do the demographic assessment. So, you know, pandemic, we're just a little bit lagged on that, but I hope she'll have something for us next week that we can share with the board that will help for future planning as well. And so all of that said, are there any additional, I want to thank everybody so much because this was such a collaborative night and it felt really good for me to hear from everybody in more detail about the good work that they're doing and they're putting forward. So I want to thank all my colleagues and thank the board for bearing with us for this long time. Are there any final questions?
I have a couple of quick things.
Sure.
Okay. So I sent you an email about the CARES funding and the ESSER funding. That's not, you know, you can get back to me whenever about that. We don't have to discuss it right now, but last year's budget, you created something, you know, after the whole braiding thing that was new to us last year. You had created, I think we just called it like an index for the future, like what was next year going to look like after all
this. The cliff, yeah.
The cliff, okay. And I couldn't remember. It's late. But that made sense to me last year, and that it doesn't really fit with this.
Yeah.
So, okay. I mean, and maybe I just have to go back and remind myself, but if you have that somewhere and you're sending us things, and also, could we get our usual budget binder?
Yes, certainly. And so budget binder, because the detail is in there, and I know that people like to see the detail. The PowerPoint and the cliff. So the cliff I should be able to send out by, I would say, Thursday. I just have to review it over with Dr. Sal now that there's new info. The budget binder, I'm hoping to have to you by Wednesday. And the PowerPoint we'll definitely have by Wednesday next week for the board meeting. And so for Tuesday's presentation, I'll have a draft of the PowerPoint that for those of us that would like to come attend, we'll be able to have, you know, feedback on and be able to see a preview of the PowerPoint. Does that sound good?
Well, we're voting on Wednesday, no?
Yes. So would you like the binder earlier? Okay. I can get the binder to you by Friday, so you'd have it over the weekend. Yeah. And so the PowerPoint, I won't have the presentation until next week because I need to, I mean, we're essentially just dusting off last year's presentation and updating it with current information because it's everything we're familiar with. And so that won't take us long, but I probably wouldn't provide that in advance of next week's meeting. I'd have that for next week and a draft on Tuesday, but I can certainly get you the binder by Friday.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll get you the cliff this week also. The cliff document, if you recall, that was saying if we had $5 million that we were spending on CARES, and at the time we didn't have coronavirus relief funds, but CARES Act and the Alliance carryover and the reserves from the city, what would we still need from the city to maintain that funding? And that was about $1 million. And so that was saying that we were going to shift all of the existing things that we could into Alliance for this year. And so, yep, I'll just dust that off, but I've got to review that with cabinet before I send that out to everybody. Yeah, good point. Okay. Any other questions?
I'm sorry.
Let us say,
Mrs. Are you anticipating another meeting?
Yes, I would.
A board meeting?
Yes, I would like one on Tuesday. I think it's important that we polish this up and go through, you know, some more issues to refine it. Whether you want to do it as a workshop or a finance meeting, I'll leave it up to you. My preference would be as a workshop because it just saves us a lot of time at board meetings. And I think the input of the entire board going through this is important as we get everybody's questions at the same time.
Just a quick question for Courtney. You're sending out the presentation to everyone tomorrow, am I correct? Or Carol, whoever does this. You're sending out the presentation that you just did tonight, tomorrow.
yes, that's right. I can send it out to you tonight. I'm just going to PDF it and send it over. So the first, I guess, 5 tabs of this document I'll be sending along. And then it sounds like Rich will follow up about next Tuesday.
Right, that would be my suggestion. I'll leave it up to Gladys and to Dr. Sal, you know, and to whether it's a finance or a workshop. My preference would be a workshop next Tuesday. If we could do it at 6 o'clock, that'd be fine.
That's fine with your committee members that you have here and the members that are here. If it's okay, we'll move forward with it, you know.
Is everybody in agreement with?
It's okay with me.
Yeah. Well, if everybody just wants to signify by saying aye, that's good. And
Aye.
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 Okay, so we'll schedule a board workshop over the budget at 6 o'clock.
Yep.
Yes,
Tuesday? Okay.
Thank you so much for everybody. Courtney, thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your patience.
Thank you.
Sure. Bye now.
Night.